Danganronpa has a lot of stuff it's known for. To rattle off a few, you've got Your Favorite Character Dies 1, Your Favorite Character Dies 2, Island Edition, and Your Favorite Character Dies 50 version 3. Then you've got the Only Good entry, and of course, we land on today's subject. Danganronpa 3, confusingly not the same as 53v3, is the final entry in Danganronpa's main universe, what we scholars call the Hope's Peak series. Interestingly though, Danganronpa 3 says adios to class trials and choice. It's an anime, not a video game. This isn't how it's supposed to work. Yes, an anime of all things, and funnily enough, the first one I've ever watched, so that's fun. In this video, you read the title, I hope. I'll be looking back on this weird little enigma that somehow slipped its way into my favorite franchise, and retrospecting my way to the grave with it. Expect the usual weirdness and me being utterly flabbergasted by how Japanese animation works, as I delve into the yin of the yang, future arc. Something Makoto Naegi, knee him in the balls, and overdosing is sick. See you after the title sequence, with my analysis of the setting and premise. Why? Why is this so familiar? Future Foundation's headquarters instantly struck me as odd. From the moment we panned around and got a good look at these freaks, I recognized the feeling immediately. Then the Three Musketeers wandered on in and, yep, this is Danganronpa 1 all over again. That's right, the HQ embodies that endless liminality of Hope's Peak Academy. There's nobody around and every corridor feels like a death trap waiting to be sprung. Just what I crave when it comes to a good killing game. The place feels so cluttered yet so empty. There's rubble, monitors, and corpses everywhere, though it's all white noise. It's meant to perfectly contrast Danganronpa's usual settings by, ironically, becoming them in the most wrong way possible. The corridors are emblematic of Hope's Peak, yet the fun, multicolored lights are gone. It doesn't feel like a place that's meant to look empty for the sake of Monokuma's psychological torture. The HQ just is empty. Full stop. Then look over here, there are also large, open areas like in Danganronpa 2, yet these open spaces have a ceiling. There's no sun to leer down upon us, and without that light, it all looks and feels the same. Oh, and there's debris like in V3, though guess what? It doesn't give any personality to the space whatsoever. The colourless mundanity of cobble and concrete makes it no different whether it's strung together as a secure wall or piled haphazardly as fallen debris. Where's the distinction, the sensationalism? I mean, there's a stark contrast between the first game's setting, the second, the third, etc. But here? It embodies the qualities of each title, yet blends them all together by removing one key variable, light. Without colour to liven up the area and set the tone, reality sets in beautifully. If all is the same, the killing game becomes sterilized, brutal, and not fun anymore. Monokuma exists for no other reason than setting the stakes. Other than that, the entire game is automated. It doesn't matter who is killed, as long as someone dies and despair follows. That's enough for Rip Van Winkle over here. It takes all the identifiers that make each killing game unique and shoves them into an amalgam of noise and unimportance, to the point where everything is singular. And an important question here: why? If the killing games work just fine with class trials and quirky mascot bears, why change the formula at all? The end goal of this killing game was to influence the illustrious Ryota Mitarai to spread the Hope video across the globe. Hence, our mastermind took a different approach to reaching that objective. Trials only matter when you want to drag out that feeling of despair. Someone dies, then you investigate, then you bellow at each other's throats for hours, and then someone is executed. The killing game is adapted specifically for its goal, to spread despair. Without that as your sole reason, the game adapts. Freedom is an illusion. You're meant to feel like anyone could die at any point, which pushes others to doubt those around them, killing quickly in cold blood, because there's no real consequence. The stakes are simply kill or be killed, so just get on with it. That's what they want us to believe, since that causes more despair in the shortest amount of time. The key is not to harvest Ryota's despair, but to have him feel so much of it at once that he becomes overwhelmed, compelled to push that red button and spread hope to the world. Thus, tropes are there simply as that. Tropes. They don't mean anything, which is why the lights are off, to save electric. I mean, focus. It just has to feel like Junko's killing game. That's all. Monokuma is there as a red herring to say, yeah, it's me! Don't worry about uncovering the mastermind or anything! The same goes for the location. It's just there to contain people and force them into a killing environment, like a castle trailer of despair and mutual killing. Purely functional. That's our first piece of foreshadowing that this killing game is not what it seems. Moving on, a huge change that occurred in this here future arc is the blood. Why ain't no pink? Where'd my pink blood go? Yeah, we're getting real serious with this one. Despair arc still has it, so what the hell, me right hen? What's all this about? There's something so deliberate about this change that I can't help but discuss it. Of course, you may have caught on already, but it's the identifiers. To us, the viewers, that pink blood is Junko's influence. It's Monokuma's way of trivializing death as nothing more than Vivzy Pop humor. I'm running out of breath. If her grubby little hands are on it, then that shit's pink. Instead, having the blood appear red is a deliberate visual cue to the audience. It not only foreshadows Junko's non-influence and the true nature of this killing game, but it's also a case of maturity. Future Arc is meant to emphasize what this game is when it isn't stylized. It's just people killing people. From the tragedy of Hope's Peak Academy to V3, you had Junko and her fangirls there to laugh at the torture and lighten the mood to something twisted. Twisted, yet alive. When you kill for despair, the blood is pink, it serves its purpose. When the blood is red, it's the unfortunate cold effect of a rigid cause. Since Tengan is fighting on the side of hope in a harsh sense, there's no need to make things feel more alive than they actually are. Once people die, they're dead, that's it. Audience, are you listening? They're not coming back! Except Kyoko, but let's ignore her. More importantly, is Mitarai listening? After all, the brutality here is all for him. Making us see the world through his eyes subverts the way this anime positions us as an observer. Speaking of which, yeah, we aren't a part of this killing game, and that's incredibly important. The nature of this anime allows us to see this world from the third person, flip-flopping here and there, back and forth between A, B, and C plots like it's nobody's business. It seats us at the audience table, forces us to watch and understand while being powerless to do anything about it. Deductions unfold without your influence, and no matter how much you scream at the screen, they'll never hear you. You just look like a lunatic. Again and again, Danganronpa 3 takes what we know about this series and subverts it in the most wrong way possible. We see the world through a more brutal, painful lens, the red blood and the scenes of death happening right there, on screen, uncensored, yet we are more powerless than ever before. The show draws us into its world more deeply by simultaneously pushing us away. Removing all of our agency fundamentally changes how we connect to these characters. Our outside perspective reshapes the hierarchy of who we emotionally invest in. Makoto is someone we've been. Kyoko, Byakuya, Hina, these are people we've spoken to directly, shaped relationships with, and spent hours inhabiting the space of. And once you take that first-person access card away, there's nowhere left to go. Ripping us away and plopping us down as observers weakens that bond, if anything. It's like being asked to connect with a hamster through the glass of its cage after you've already held it in your hands. You just can't. We're chasing a level of intimacy that only exists through direct control, and without that, the connection just poofs out of existence. By contrast, the new characters in Danganronpa 3 have only ever existed at a distance. We don't get the free time events, nor any optional conversations or personalized moments to flesh them out. So instead, the anime cues us to lock in harder, to scrutinize every line and every reaction, every scrap of information, or at least that's how I did it. That's not really a shock though, is it? That's my whole thing. As if we're trying to manufacture our own free time events out of whatever the narrative gives us. That teensy little change quietly pulls our attention away from Makoto and Kyoko and the rest of the familiar faces, and redirects it towards these newcomers. Not because the old cast is unimportant, I mean far from it, but because they can't give us anything new anymore. The new characters, meanwhile, feel genuinely new, no longer overshadowed by the goats in the room, but elevated precisely because they're the only ones we can still discover. Speaking of discovering things, I discovered an interesting aspect of Danganronpa 3 I'd like to throw your way. Shock value. Much less discovered and more ingrained into my eyeballs. This whole thing is much more brutal than Danganronpa usually is. Both arcs, but I can only handle one at a time, so give me a moment, damn it. Once again, the brutality in this thing is another way of foreshadowing Junko's absence. Back in ye olde days, her killings were less than clean. Then over time, she managed to refine and gamify the formula until Trigger Happy Havoc happened, where the final form of her despair-making parade was put on full display. Things become more structured, formulaic, and as I mentioned before, optimized for despair. Brutality became a thing of the past, and Junko realized that forcing people to think of a plot, plan accordingly, and execute it flawlessly meant that bloodshed went out of the window. The executions followed, with less and less gore as things went on, as she realized that the students respond best when suffering is played for laughs and framed in an unserious manner. Gruesome, mind-shattering torture was nothing more than shocking. Spice it up a bit, and instead of focusing on the horrible scene before him, the participants focus on a single refined thought. There is no hope. If even death is a punchline, what's the point of moving on? In future arc, the reason we still see that cold-blooded style of killing is because Tengan doesn't give a shit. It makes the killings much more grounded in reality, and rather than despair-inducing, it's a quiet acknowledgement. Yeah, this happens. It's not sugar-coated and sprinkled with confetti, so all that's left is to accept reality and frantically try to escape. Leaving the violence unrestrained removes your usual failure states, that meaning, you know what, you'll understand. When there are no consequences beyond death itself, the plan can't go wrong. Killers don't need to be clever nor careful. That's why the brutality feels so unfiltered. The game allows for infinite outcomes because none of them actually matter individually, thus causing more spur-of-the-moment outbursts than death and, of course, a step closer to Tengan's goal. It feels awfully artificial and mechanical therefore, as participants are picked off like flies, we're presented with this sense that something's closing in on us. That the purpose is not to beat the game, but for the game to pick off all the irrelevant runts and focus in on one individual, Ryota. The brutality in that sense allows us to see the worst of the worst, only for it to be ripped away in an instant, moved on from and sidelined for the sake of progressing forward toward escape. The intention is to remove the shock around death so we can move on to the real main event. It doesn't matter how they die as long as they do. Poison them, let them clash and barrel through walls, rip everything apart, who cares? As long as that boy gets the message, does it really matter how things unfold? And notice how quickly the narrative moves on from this kind of stuff. Death happens, the shock spikes for a moment, and it's gone. Gone to fucking Nihon or whatever. That breakneck pacing reflects how the game itself values these people, as expendable variables being filtered out one by one. The brutality is there, but it's never allowed to linger, because lingering would imply meaning. Daisaku means nothing, the Great Gozu means nothing, Seiko means nothing. I guess she already knew that. It's only when the story briefly stops, like Ruruka's flashback for example, that it dares to ask, who were these people, and what actually happened? And the fact that these moments are so rare only reinforces the point. Reflection only happens when the characters force it. Outside of that, the game continues as if nothing had happened. And that's the real cruelty of it. Pain is nothing to this game. The only question it asks is, how important are you? In a despair-driven killing game, suffering is stretched out and ritualized because every death needs to mean something. Here, the meaning is reserved for outcomes. If a death doesn't advance the goal, it's brushed aside no matter how brutal it was. That's where the tonal whiplash comes from. You're shown violence more graphic than anything Danganronpa usually allows, only for the story to immediately move on as if it never happened. It's painful not because it's shocking, but because it's dismissed. The brutality reminds us how little these deaths matter to the system. To shift along a bit to something less bloody, I have to mention how downright evil Future Arc makes its characters before the killing game even begins. They make us hate these people, man. Not even 5 minutes in, Munakata's telling Makoto to kill himself, Juzo's threatening to throw hands with literally anyone if they so much as doubt his crush, and amongst it all, Ryota's been a little wuss trying not to get chewed out both verbally and physically. Everyone's either a scuttling coward or the most reprehensible, obnoxious asshole imaginable. Once the game begins, we already have enemies, not exactly something we're used to in this franchise. Setting up these antagonistic figures early allows characters like Tengan, and I'll go out on a limb here and say Ruruka, more on her in a bit, to blend into the background seamlessly. We're so focused on them possibly getting their asses kicked by Drug Woman and Sword Boy that we completely forget what this game is all about. And thus, we forget about the atmosphere, the building we're in. Giving us immediate visual stakes eliminates most suspicions we may have about the architect of this killing game. Ultimately, things move so fast that you just don't have time to doubt, and of course, that's some deliberate shit if I've ever smelled it. Giving us these antagonists and driving our attention away is what allows the chaos to continue to unfold. It's what makes Tengan's handiwork remain not unseen per se, but unacknowledged. We immediately see how easy the phrase are to point out the moment Kyoko takes a step back for a second and goes, wait, we should probably screw our heads on for a second. If those cracks appeared too early, the jig would be up. In addition to this, I'd argue the entire show hinges on Kyosuke's drive for justice. As long as he and his lackeys remain at the throat of the traitor Makoto Naegi, the cards will continue to rest in their place, exactly where the mastermind needs them. It's designed to feel that way so you make out Kyosuke as the main villain. He has obviously got to be the big bad, since without him, it seems the entire system would fall apart. Thus, I really like using that word, don't I? You'd be right to assume he's either the target of this despair fest or the originator behind it. You see what I'm saying? With that, it centers him in the story. The camera frames it that way. Munakata's always in the center of the frame, the main subject, whereas Tengan is left off to the side as background noise, something you may recognize through another one of our masterminds in this series. By framing Munakata as the antagonist, the show gives us permission to believe that intent is the problem, that if we could just remove the bad man, everything would resolve. That belief mirrors Munakata's own worldview, and in doing so, the audience unknowingly aligns with his blind spot. This also works from an audience perspective too. Remember when I mentioned how much more attention we pay to the newcomers this time around? Well, taking advantage of that focus by splitting half the cast into good and evil dares the viewer to try and understand this carnage. It all kicks off so fast, from episodes 1 through 5, that you're basically under the assumption that the ones attacking Makoto are bad people. You want to understand to take a step back, though the pacing doesn't allow that, forcing you to make assumptions you otherwise would have tried to unpack. As we learn later on, Juzo is just Mondo in a state of desperation. I mean, that's just Mondo, but okay. Munakata's just Byakuya if he could actually feel emotion and had his perfect world ripped from him, and is now burdened with the new world depending on his every move. Once you understand the states these people are in, and what kind of thoughts are rummaging around their minds, it becomes much clearer. Future Arc deliberately chooses not to let that slip until later, so up front, you have someone to hate, you have a distraction to focus on as you get used to the atmosphere running in the background. Otherwise, you would consider and you would doubt. Allowing you to unconsciously settle into this setting by focusing on a completely different issue is what scrambles your brain when the pacing finally decides to let go. You're left in a state of whiplash and twisted comfort where you see no need to doubt the walls, or the debris, or Monokuma's unusual absence. It's all stuff you've become acquainted with, even if, in truth, you never fully considered it the way you usually would. Okay, now I'd like to discuss what I'd argue is Future Arc's most important trait: Junko Enoshima. This killing game deliberately masquerades as freer and more open than the others in the franchise. If we take ourselves along the timeline to where this all started, we notice a pattern in Junko's evolution. The tragedy of Hope's Peak Academy was this fast, unrestrained burst of just murder. Just get it over with and get rid as quickly as you can. Then we see structure being introduced in the mainline titles. You had a casual loop of do this, do that, and once a murder happened, there was a line of reasoning to follow along to the class trial, and so on. Yet still, there was a core philosophy. You choose to kill, you choose how to kill, you choose whether to lie, confess, or fail. There was still agency. The game was still in response to the players. In Future Arc, things are spun on their head. We're right back where we started, with unpredictable brutality, except this time, the lack of trials and deduction are replaced instead of removed, by controlled killings. The killer and victim are predetermined by the system. It throws you for a loop, thinking the lack of structure is so much worse, when in reality, this killing game is more structured than ever. It's a subversion, meant to appear with the freedom of the first killing game, when really, it has the systemization of the last. Alright, there it is, our setting and premise. This went on way longer than I anticipated. Okay, so chapter 2 is all about the character analysis. Character analysis. That's what it's all about. My opinions on the mental illness this show throws at us, as per usual, or if you're new here, you probably have no clue. It's opinions mixed with light analysis. You'll get it. Let's get on with it then. Title sequence. We love a good rhyming scheme here at Cryptid Industries. Faces hated. It just flows so well, doesn't it? Okay. Anyway, first up, I'll just mention this real fast. This chapter will be focused on the newbies, the ones future art gives us a full screening for. And since our next chapter will focus on the plot itself, previous hopeful lunatics like Makoto and Kyoko will be shoved aside for now and redirected there. Why? Well, quite simply, since we already know them. Their development isn't important right now, so get out of here. Kyosuke Munakata, I feel like he's probably a good place to start immediately, and I hope I'm not alone in this. I didn't really like how he tried to kill Makoto the moment he walked in the room. Call me old-fashioned, but he's the greatest thing to ever exist and defeated Junko Noshima. That's 2 points on the Golden Boy criteria sheet. Also, don't play with my attachment like that. On one hand, though, I understand where he's coming from. Makoto is brought in as the traitor for harboring the most dangerous terrorist to ever exist, and is sentenced to death. Bit harsh, but in the tragedy, can you really blame the extreme measures? I don't exactly believe court hearings are still in session, and as the leader of the hopeful revolution, you can't afford to sympathise. To make things worse, immediately after he walks in, they're all crashing to the floor from sleeping gas and they wake up in a killing game. His reasoning is mostly sound. On the other hand, I know Makoto's completely innocent, so please get off his back. Please. The thing is with first impressions, they're not very thoughtful. Thankfully, hindsight gives me the privilege of screaming at Kyosuke with evidence. In half seriousness, I can kind of empathise with Kyosuke's methods, since in a world where the enemy will literally do anything, including brainwashing former allies into spies and catalysts, once you suspect a person to be part of that system, what choice do you have? To protect the safety of the group, Kyosuke is compelled to violence as the ultimate form of eradication. Across his frontline battles with Future Foundation, he's learned the only way to counteract despair is to destroy every last strand from its ever-expanding web, no matter what it takes. If anything stands in his way from Gozu to Tengan, he'll fight them to the bitter end to reach his goal. To him, even a second of doubt is a symptom. You are siding with the enemy for even giving despair a chance to speak, for Munakata knows extensively how it only takes a few words for it to spread to others. Despair is a plague. He doesn't question its existence. If one exudes symptoms of the virus, he will terminate the host before it can spread. It's cold and impersonal. He isn't evil by any stretch of the imagination. The system he lives under has forced him to adapt in ways that only make sense within those circumstances, and those circumstances matter. They make his behavior expected. Makoto isn't unaware of this. No one in that room is. Everyone understands despair, at least broadly, and understands the consequences of displaying it. There's no shock that Kyosuke would cut the problem off at the source. If you're in the fucking mafia and you do a big oopsie, odds are you're gonna get whacked. Common knowledge. It's the same with Future Foundation. Symptoms mean you're getting the business end of a fire katana. That shared understanding is why nobody villainizes Kyosuke, not even Makoto himself. The goal isn't to condemn him, but to influence him, to show him another way. And Kyosuke is observant. He notices a pattern in the killing game that only tightens the noose around Makoto's neck. Every time Makoto delays his execution with hopeful rhetoric, someone dies. One hopeful monologue, one death. Understandably, Kyosuke believes him to be the anomaly. There's also something more uncomfortable at play. Kyosuke has sympathy for himself. He views his experience as true despair, and as we see when he belittles Makoto's killing school life, he's willing to diminish others to preserve that belief. Seeing himself as the one who hit rock bottom, lower than anyone else, gives him legitimacy. If he endured the worst despair imaginable, then he earns the right to judge it. If he admits others had it worse, what authority does he have to play judge? It's a delusion he sells himself to maintain the role he believes he plays in this world's eyes. There's no room for emotion, only action. And yet, paradoxically, Kyosuke does understand complexity, he just refuses to engage with it. Chisa is proof of that. Ominous pause. He forgives her because he loved her, because he wanted to see the good in her, even as she was silently brainwashed alongside him. That belief that hope can still exist within despair is what ultimately breaks him. His arc is about dismantling the idea that the world must be treated as black and white just because it presents itself that way. For most of his life, Kyosuke is reactive. He adapts to the ever-declining shitstorm of a world he lives in. And when something unfamiliar and terrifying emerges, he responds with absolutes. He does this for so long that when Makoto suggests despair might have nuance, it threatens Kyosuke's entire worldview. That's why he dismisses Makoto's suffering. Makoto's killing game had rules and structure and hot men. Kyosuke had pure, unrestrained chaos. Of course Makoto can afford empathy. He had it easy. He's privileged, so to speak. Kyosuke clings to the belief that he must remain unmoving, that only once despair is eradicated can he allow himself to open his eyes. Until then, he blindfolds himself and fights on instinct, leaving no room for error and no room for understanding. We do love a good analogy here, don't we? That's a good analogy. I like that one. Makoto cannot define hope in Kyosuke's eyes. He doesn't understand it. Kyosuke remains regimented to oblivion until despair itself speaks to him and proves his ideology wrong. Don't know if you know this, despair can't speak, it doesn't have a mouth, so he's kind of just stuck there forever. Chisa is the one who breaks all of that. Another ominous pause. He didn't want to believe Tengan's words, but he had to. He held a fiery rage both mentally, that's not even a word, dude, both mentally and physically to the point of Juzo, and regretted it harshly. So, racked with guilt and questioning his sexuality, he tries to redeem himself by taking back the reins. If he killed his own best friend and the game isn't over, then it's rigged. Tengan must have been lying, right? It's Makoto, it's gotta be. Though, as he and Makoto fight, he thinks and thinks until he hesitates. Memories flood in, Chisa's words, moments shared, and in the end, he knows the answer. She was a member of Ultimate Despair. The death that followed wherever she walked was not coincidence, it was her. And yet, she still made him happy. That contradiction forces Kyosuke to acknowledge nuance, that even someone who fell to despair could still embody hope. That's where everything changes. What's fascinating is, well, not fascinating, but interesting is probably a better word. Okay, is how similar Kyosuke and Makoto actually are. Both are motivators, both are inspiring hope. I'll do that again. Both inspire hope in the broken. They just take opposite routes. Makoto leans into nuance, tries to understand those who fell, offering even Junko a special education. Offering even Junko a second chance and fighting to redeem the remnants of despair. Kyosuke, instead, tries to stabilize the world through absolutes, believing that if he eradicates despair completely, hope will remain by default. And despite everything, he does admire Makoto. He respects his voice, his insistence on using words rather than slaughtering everything and leaving hope as a final variable. Kyosuke just needed the will to prove that hope wasn't something you had to force into existence. Also, he looks funny. I'd even come back from that. Let's get on next. Daisaku Bandai. What is this, a joke? Immediately, I don't have much to say. Dude was born into this wonderful, complex world and is immediately killed off for not looking away. Poor guy. He could have seen Seiko overdose. Oh my God, I'm actually so... He has a lot more impact in the story section since there's so much to discuss about his narrative role and how he kicks off the killing game in a way Chisa's initial death doesn't, by removing ambiguity, but I'll leave it there for now. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. His squeaky voice was hilarious, and I can see the genuine warm heart in that 7 foot tall frame. 7 foot tall! 7 foot tall! Whew, can I warm up for this next one? Okay, no. Great Gozu. Holy yes! Are you kidding me? Gozu embodies exactly what you think of when you say an organization that aims to end despair. Even in the worst situations, he fights for what's right, and I love him. His energy is so similar to Nekomaru's, it's polarizing. I don't mean that in a bad way. He's supposed to be the protector, the one who would throw himself into the line of fire to protect the fairness of the trial. He knows Makoto's charged with treason, but Gozu understands that nuance exists. He hasn't completely lost it like Kyosuke. My boy still has hope in others. He admits that he admires Makoto and wants to see him succeed, showing that even in doubt, he wants to pull through and shed light on the genuine greatness of people. It's in his name after all. Great. Get it? I'd say once again he serves an incredible narrative purpose rather than a purely character-driven one, but dude is a ball of energy you just love being around, you know? And him being the first to physically fight back and put himself in harm's way to protect what he believes in, it's what shows us that Future Foundation isn't entirely a lost cause. It's a lot of unresolved baggage and bottled up trauma, sure, but people still exist within it who genuinely believe in its core thesis. Okay, we had our little quick fireys, now let's move on to a much more mean person. He's mean. Juzo Sakakura is an interesting one for me. Literally the moment his stupid dumb face and awesome, really cool design showed up on my screen, I actually hated him, bro, to the core, actually, man. Nah. From my comfy little viewing chair, he came across as this snarky, thinks he's better than you type who bulldozes his way through a room full of already tragic bastards. Like, the fact you can be an ego head to an ego head is astonishing to me. He pushes back against everyone until, of course, his little crush walks in the room. Right then, serious hand right now, red alert people, my favorite dictator just showed up. He's annoying in that sly, needling way. His goal isn't just to be better than you, is to make sure you know he's better than you. He wants it to sting. All the while, in the same breath, sucking up to the absolute center of his universe, Kyosuke Munakata. And I think that's what really gets me. There's something uniquely aggravating about cowards compared to people who just do terrible things. Juzo believes physical dominance is the only way to assert himself, appearing masculine as if he's running rings around everyone in the room. But that attitude is immediately contrasted by how Munakata treats violence, something of necessity. Munakata derives power from leadership and words. Juzo derives it from intimidation. That contrast makes him so much easier to hate, and because of that, the blow is minimized to most everyone else. Now, obviously, we've established people like him are meant to be antagonistic from the start and divert attention away from blah blah blah, so we can mention that again. Though Juzo has so much more to him. He ties his entire worth to the fact that he's useful. He can be used by Kyosuke and serve under him, inheriting his ideology through osmosis. He wants that validation, to be the best, so he can feel worthy of standing as a head of Future Foundation, a head of the world's leading savior, and to his credit, he commits to that idea completely. He literally fights with a spear through his shoulder with a gash across his chest till all the blood exits his body to help and save in whatever way he can. His methods are awful, sure, but his intent is sincere. Juzo genuinely means well, even if he spits venom while doing it. Moving on, Juzo understands that words can disarm. As a boxer, he knows how to read people, how to insult, dissect, and probe for weaknesses. He's fully a rage baiter. Whenever he wants to catch someone off guard, he does it verbally first. But that's the thing, no matter how much he wants words to be enough, he never trusts them to finish the job. So he puts Ryota down, mocks his pacifist, and that's all fine and dandy, but then, when that doesn't yield instant results, he knees him in the gut. Silence achieved, yippee! As much as Juzo pretends his words can hurt, he always falls back on violence because violence gives him feedback. If insults don't work immediately, he just escalates. Physicality is the only language that's ever given him clear, instant confirmation that he matters, that he's in control. People can hide how much words hurt, but bruises don't lie, my dude. Munakata understands that over time, words shape people slowly and permanently. Juzo doesn't have the patience or the self-worth for that. He needs immediacy. His attention span's so shit, man. He needs instant validation and feedback to live, to be constantly wanted, asked, and seen as a useful asset. Otherwise, like, say, Peko, he deems himself a tool, and therefore useless if his expertise goes unwanted. You know who needs instant validation? Pets require instant validation, not humans. He almost dehumanizes himself in that sense, even if he never says it out loud. Now, we don't know much about his home life, but all throughout both arcs, Juzo shows inklings of toxic masculinity and how, despite the walls he puts up, he is ultimately complacent and bends to authority, disguising it as duty of the sword he is. In reality, he refuses to admit he has feelings or emotions, that he is anything more than a tool. There are times when he shows how much he cares for others, even if it's immediately contrasted by the fearful bellowing of trying to regain order and maintain that persona. When Daisaku grabs him by the shoulder, Juzo's eyes widen at the sight, but he doesn't push Bandai away. He's a boxer. His reaction time should be mint. If he genuinely cared about his own safety, he'd have clocked the symptoms instantly and pulled away. Like, this guy looks ill, I don't want him anywhere near me. Instead, he just stares. That hesitation is completely out of character for someone with such sharp instincts, especially someone who pretends he doesn't care about anyone. Same thing with Seiko. She shoves him aside with ease and he doesn't even try to retaliate. This is after he's already established that he isn't above hitting a woman if it gets him closer to Kyosuke's goal. So why threaten Hina but not Seiko? You could argue authority, but even then, his persona doesn't allow closeness regardless. We see it again with Gozu. When Gozu grabs his blade, Juzo freezes instead of letting go. He then daydreams or something, could have fought back, but okay, and then spots Makoto making his grand exit and locks back in. It even gets him caught off guard and, rightfully, whacked by Gozu for it. In each of these instances, Juzo could have escalated, yet he chooses not to for some reason. Also, there's the guilt he carries over Junko. Juzo resents Makoto not just because Makoto represents everything he despises ideologically and more, but because Makoto did what Juzo didn't. Makoto stopped her. Juzo could have done something and didn't. That resentment is his humanity surfacing in the worst way. He wishes he were the one who atoned, the one who acted, the one who made it right. His shame twists that regret into anger and hatred. At his core, Juzo wants to do good, but his methods are so abrasive, so violently misdirected, that they make people hate him. And when that happens, he doubles down. Fine then, if he is despised as a human, then he can live as a tool, serving his purpose, then accepting his end. That mindset is so deeply ingrained that he even forgives Kyosuke for leaving him with a fatal injury. In his eyes, he's already ceased to be useful. He's simply one with the trash, thrown out like anything static and single purpose would be. Bro, the guy left you with a slice through your abdomen. Actually chill and let yourself die for once. And yet, for some heinous bloody reason, he keeps moving. He wades through unimaginable pain just to try and be useful one last time. That persistence, misguided as it is, adds layers of nuance to his character that I genuinely adore engaging with. In retrospect, I empathize with his position, I respect his strengths and still despise his methods, and that's okay. That's interpretation, let it be. He isn't purely good or purely bad, but we're allowed to like him anyway, who cares? Okie dokie, moving on. Oh my, it's my favorite holy everything god that exists, let's talk. Seiko Kimura is hands down my favorite character here. I don't know what all this is about, but I love her so much that there's very little you can do to stop me from rambling about her. She deserves far more than what we got. What I adore about Seiko is how painfully obvious it is that she only wants to help, that's it. She rushes to people's sides, intervening without a second thought, and she offers aid even when it puts her in danger. She's so fixated on helping others that she becomes vulnerable to manipulation, because she just wants to feel useful. But her need for that usefulness isn't the same as Juzo's. Don't get it twisted, you're comparing an angel to an imp over here. Seiko accepts being used if she's verbally convinced it's for the greater good. I say verbally because there's all the understanding that if she knew what those laxatives were for, she would not have given them to Nagito. The only time she knowingly uses drugs to harm someone is when she finally snaps and targets Ruruka after years of sustained abuse. Every other time, she acts from genuine belief. She trusts people. She gives medicine and serums only when asked, because if someone is asking, they must need it, and she has hope that their reason is good. That trust is exactly how she's taken advantage of. Her desperation to help leads her to bend to the expectations of others who see her as weak. Nowhere is this clearer than with Ruruka, also known as Satan herself. Despite Seiko explicitly stating that the sugar would kill her due to the medication, Ruruka guilt trips her into believing she's selfish for not trying her sweets, the prick. And whoop-de-doo, what does Seiko do? She internalizes it. Again and again she bends over backwards, as if she still carries pain every day for something that was never her fault. All she wants is to be liked, and all she wants is to help. She's so kind, so gentle, and it's impossible not to feel like she could have become anything if she only understood her own worth and stood by her craft. Yet the unfortunate truth is that it isn't her fault, but the fault of others who twist her kindness. Her often pessimistic view of herself and life in general makes her someone who seeks validation so deeply because it's the only thing that makes her feel good. If she can't save someone, she beats herself up for it. She continues to craft and hone her work until she's finally confident her serums can actually save anyone. She's kind of a perfectionist in that sense. Prime example is them dogs. Them dogs, I say about a traumatic incident. She saves one dog, but not the other. Both would have died without her intervention, yet the fact she couldn't save both sends her spiraling. That single failure becomes a lifelong vow. No life should ever be unsavable in her presence. Unfortunately, the more casualties, the less the value of the individual. It could be saving one dog out of 2, or saving 99 out of 100. Regardless, she feels like she failed. That's where her rage and anguish come from. Guilt over the lives she couldn't save. Anger at herself for not making her serums good enough. And buried beneath it all, the quiet, devastating awareness that people like Ruruka aren't kind, that they don't make her feel safe or valued, but she keeps helping them anyway, because helping people is the only thing that gives her life true meaning. That tiny light at the end of a long dark tunnel is why her identity becomes so deeply entwined with her craft. Take that away, and she doesn't know who she is. And that's what makes Seiko so heartbreaking and why she's low-key my favourite character in the show. Don't tell anyone I said that. Anywho, let's get deep into our next subject. Koichi Kizakura, the former ultimate he's actually well sick. Koichi is so cool, dude. He's such a laid-back, weird vibe in this game. He shrugs, chuckles to himself, and makes remarks like he's the one observing. The way that I interpret it as the ultimate talent scout, he's obviously quite an observant person, which is what gives him that aloof, loose feel. He feels allowed to relax because he recognizes patterns. That's his job. He's trained to understand what talent looks like, and through that, he's learned how certain people act. Intellectual talents like detective or pharmacist tend to carry a much calmer atmosphere, but with rising mental strain and tension, see Seiko. Physical talents like wrestler or boxer lean toward outward physical confrontation. Koichi recognizes these patterns, which allows him to push just the right amount with people like Juzo, enough to get in their head, but holding them in an ideological chokehold so they can't fight back. That's why he spends so much time around the smart freaks. Kyoko, as we'll discuss soon, Ryota, Jinkirigiri, etc. He picks the most mentally sound, or least likely to harm, people to hang around with, because he knows that those who remain quiet are just as observant as he is. The way he hangs around both Kyoko and Ryota is especially interesting. Kyoko is the headstrong, duty-first intellect, and Ryota is the nervous, cowering one who stays silent while watching everything. Koichi is able to pick these people out because of his own intelligence. Either one alone would warp the atmosphere of the room, but together, they balance it. Koichi recognizes that pairing instinctively. With the tension stabilized, focusing on what actually matters becomes almost effortless. For a while, I'll be honest, I did think Koichi was just the random weirdo who thought he was in on the joke, but looking back, he's the one making the jokes. He makes a joke out of everyone, and is in a bloody good position to do so. He creates the kind of environment where escape and clarity are even possible. And surprise, surprise, his little group ends up making the most meaningful breakthroughs in the story. Koichi absolutely knew that would happen. Furthermore, his devotion to Kyoko is also worth talking about. He clearly respects her, enough to call her by her first name when reflecting on her. And given how close he was to her father in Despair arc, protecting Kyoko after Jin's death becomes personal. What makes it work is that it never feels creepy or forced. Thank goodness we have enough of that already. They even mention that in the show, though I'm guessing that's just anime being anime. Koichi latches onto an already beloved character, sure, and that should be some form of felony, but it feels earned somehow. He's the perfect counterbalance to Kyoko, witty, emotionally perceptive, and just grounded enough to teach her in ways she doesn't quite understand herself. That's why he can make an offhand comment about her being too stern. Kyoko responds, predictably, with "I'm a detective," but later, when we see her comfort Makoto before her death, it's clear his words stuck. Koichi has a way of explaining things without turning them into lectures. It's casual, natural, like any other conversation. That ease removes fear from heavy topics. He treats them the same way you'd treat a funny anecdote, and in doing so, makes them survivable. Great guy, a great character, great member of the alcoholic community. Next up, Kazuo Tengan. Nah, there ain't no way. Actually, I don't like him very much. Mate, he's actually so boring. Kazuo frustrates me because I just don't like him at all. He's meant to be the mastermind of the killing game, but then characters like Kyosuke and Juzo exist and completely eclipse him. He doesn't actually do anything on screen that's noteworthy for his character, in my opinion. There we go, I just wanted to get that one in there. It's honestly the same reason I don't dwell on Chisa's time as Ultimate Despair. Once someone becomes Ultimate Despair, their individuality evaporates. Whatever talents you have are harnessed to create more despair than ever. So his motivations, reasoning, the how, the why, the most important questions can all be answered by, he was brainwashed. Now, that's fine. It doesn't instantly make them bad characters, but the fact that we only ever see Kazuo as an ultimate despair means the nuance to him is minimal. He's just Junko's unwilling puppet. Also, I just have things that annoy me about him. He's easily the most unrealistic Danganronpa character. I know this anime really, well, anime-ifies things a little bit. Nekomaru gets superpowers and turns his explosive shits into something too literal, and Gundam can literally create demonic sigils. It's all a bit overplayed. But the fact I'm supposed to watch this old-ass saggy man dodge every hit from the ultimate boxer, fight the sword-wielding, able-bodied Kyosuke Munakata and put up a decent fight, and then catch a chair hurled at him in slow-mo where it just stops in its tracks, and it's not a joke? That was all improv, by the way. Be proud of me. I can get past it if it's comedy, but this is a serious moment that leads into a serious plot point and reveal, and I'm supposed to believe the guy can do all of this? It's just so uncanny, I don't really understand it personally. And I also just don't care. Like, him fighting with this weird wrist gadget and then pouring all the budget into the fight scene isn't going to make me like him if he's not actually interesting. By the end, I'm just like, okay, plot device guy. There's no real reason for him to be the mastermind anyway. Like, Junko had plenty of grounding behind her craving for despair, how she's played as a funny, corny, out-of-this-world cartoon villain. It's fun. Danganronpa 2 happened because Izuru wanted to challenge hope and despair to win his heart in the end, and see which one he'd truly gravitate towards. Once again, great motive. Monica had an extensive history of abuse that she twisted into motivation, and she serves as an incredibly unsettling villain, a force of nature who chose despair from her own will. Samugi is someone even the narrative calls plain, so at least it's funny. Kazuo, meanwhile, feels like he's framed both seriously and as some massive big reveal, but also barely. Him being the mastermind is treated as the big thing for about 2 seconds before everyone moves on. He's just not interesting to me, I just don't care at all. The joke isn't that he's unimportant and boring like it is with plain, whatever she's called. He's just genuinely underwritten, there's no depth here and I don't care for him. Right, hear me out, if you literally made Monica Toa the mastermind, yeah, this anime would be 10 times better. I've actually never said this anime before, that's sick. The fact that she chose despair and chose Junko without brainwashing is such a compelling and complex idea to me, that's my opinion. Feel free to essay in the comments about how he's actually the best character ever, whatever. Okay, next one, wow, it's actually crazy, I like this person better, that's funny. Right, Maya Gecko Gahara. Keep the awesome name. I don't have much to say about Maya because she's literally Monica Toa in disguise, but respect to her for committing to the bit though. I gotta say, for all her scoffing in more ways than one, Monica actually did a decent job of keeping Makoto's hopes up. Also, double triple points for the badass robot mecha person with all the missiles and shit. I'm glad Monica evolved from Megazords to robotic reincarnations of dead people, it's much more badass. And now, for someone I don't really like, but that's the actual point, Ruruka Ando. I actually hate Ruruka, dude. It's not a good day for me today. She's not terribly written by any means. The narrative deliberately makes her hateable, and I love that. She comes across as this single-minded person who only cares about herself and Sonosuke. Now, that's a fine idea and concept, and I'll admit they're incredibly cute together, but it gets to a point where she actively antagonizes everyone around her, especially Seiko, to the extent she'd betray anyone bar him. Or so it seems. First of all, Ruruka places enormous value on her status as the ultimate confectioner. She enhances her sweets with chemicals, cheats in competitions, and does whatever it takes to stay on top. That relentless competitiveness trains her to view the world exclusively through personal gain, and that worldview is exactly what leads her to a catastrophic decision later in the killing game, one she immediately regrets. That's why she gets so offended when Seiko says she can't try her sweets. They're her pride and joy, not just her one and only talent, but the foundation of her entire identity, and more than that, their power, their control. Never thought I'd say that about sweets. Once Ruruka realizes she can use her sweets to get whatever she wants, it only fuels her resentment further. Her issue with Seiko is rooted in unpredictability. Seiko is immune to her manipulation. If she cannot be controlled, she cannot be trusted. It's deeply troubling for Ruruka to know that people exist whom she can never fully control, people she can't use and can't leverage. She may not be a monster, but she isn't fully human either. Even from a young age, we've seen her guilt-tripping others, convincing them that they're at fault when, in reality, all they've done is set a basic boundary with her. Also, Ruruka constantly places herself at the top of the food chain. It lets her track where everyone else stands. Boundaries are dangerous to her because they create blind spots. People outside her reach might one day exploit those blind spots, and she can't allow that. So instead, she makes them feel guilty. As we see with Seiko, that guilt compels them to move closer to Ruruka, desperate to make up for the imagined misfortune they've caused her. We see this pattern repeat throughout the killing game. Once she has Seiko cornered, she tries to manipulate her into killing Kyosuke, which Seiko rightfully refuses. She uses her sweets to try and brainwash Juzo into working for her. And most importantly, she uses her sweets to murder the one she loves most. Oh, but it does not end there. Ruruka has severe trust issues, to the point where she preemptively eliminates anyone who might betray her. She repeatedly seeks blunt, constant reassurance from Sonosuke, terrified that he'll turn on her. And that fear hurts. I do feel for her there. Her distrust comes from a very human place. But she turns that fear into control, and that's where it stops being excusable. Her methods evolve so far into manipulation that even she loses track of where the line is, and once she crosses it, there's no going back. That realization shocks her to the core. Then, once she betrays Sonosuke, I lose all faith in her. He had always placed her life before his own, and yet her paranoia still wins. Sure, it's rooted in fear, and I get to that more in the next chapter, but watching her justify it and immediately pivot into eliminating as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time, I can't pity her past that point. It's actually harder than rocket science to even begin to comprehend that thought. Oh, how ironic. A little reminder here for you. Early in the killing game, Ruruka tells Sonosuke that he can betray anyone else, just not her. Well, look how the turns have tabled, my friend. After betraying Sonosuke herself, she then betrays Kyoko once the truth comes out, attempts to kill her, speaks ill of Koichi after his death, and tries to weaponize Juzo as a distraction so she can escape. We got the whole bada bing bada boom combo right there. I'm starting to think she might be a bad person. In the end, the denial and brutal realization of what she'd done finally breaks her. But instead of reflecting, she just doubles down. She keeps her chin up, her adrenaline pumping, revealing her true colors as a defense mechanism. She refuses to appear weak, throwing everything she has at the others before running off to a place where she's alone with her thoughts. Granted, those thoughts do force her to reminisce by that point, exposing that repressed human side of her that does care, but that care is twisted by her fear of betrayal. She convinces herself that betraying Sonosuke was the right choice, because to her, he would have betrayed her eventually anyway. So yeah, I hate Ruruka in the right way, which means I love her for being so complex. What can I say? I adore characters that make me really consider how I feel about them. I suppose it's not unbelievable seeing how long this video is already, eh? Well, I'd like you to take a wild guess into who our next character is. Well, I mean, come on, process of elimination would tell you Ryota Mitarai. I'm kidding. It's Sonosuke. Sonosuke Izayoi, I just wanted to say his last name, is a character I honestly don't have any strong feeling towards or against. He's incredibly loyal, and I absolutely feel for him in many ways because Sonosuke has attached himself to Ruruka to the point that's all the narrative frames him as. He's Ruruka's boyfriend who likes sweets, and as we know, sweets and Ruruka go hand in hand, and taking Ruruka's hand usually leads you off a cliff. Still, personally, didn't really bother, but that doesn't mean I'm skimping out on the analysis here. What are we, cheap? What are we, stupid people, bad people? What are we? Sonosuke finds his identity in being a protector. He enjoys being coddled from time to time. I mean, don't we all? But his lifelong devotion to Ruruka means he sides with her in almost every decision she makes. Some would call him a simp. I would call him hot. She becomes his purpose. His talent as the ultimate blacksmith gives him not only personal catharsis, but a means of protection. His creations aren't just his, they exist to keep Ruruka safe. That intent becomes clear when Seiko attacks. Sonosuke immediately shifts to using his weapons, putting himself directly in harm's way so Ruruka can escape. In my reading, everything he does, every refinement of his skill, is in service of that singular goal. What really matters though is why he stays, even knowing that Ruruka's candy has psychological effects. Even when his NG code prevents him from consuming any food at all, he still protects her. That's important. It tells us his devotion isn't chemically induced or blindly conditioned. When every comfort is stripped away, he still stands by her side. That kind of loyalty is ugly. Very ugly, but unfortunately real. That said, his relationship with Ruruka is unmistakably codependent, of course, to the point that the story itself never really allows us to see a version of Sonosuke that exists independently of her. I'd argue that's deliberate. It reinforces how Ruruka pulls quiet, obsessive personalities like Sonosuke and Seiko into her orbit and redirects everything back onto herself. Sonosuke is reserved because he sees no need to engage with the world beyond her. Ruruka is his rock, and as he says himself, he believes he is hers. It's sweet, no pun intended. That devotion reaches its most painful point in his death. When Ruruka betrays him, Sonosuke accepts it. My lord, someone saved the poor boy. He's fallen for the yandere. Even while being poisoned, he believes she deserves to live more than he does. He smiles through the pain, and that tells you quite a lot. Not just about how much he loves Ruruka, but about how completely he's defined himself around her. Even when her choice literally leads to his death, he never stops protecting her. Great job, Sonosuke. Very cool gif. Let's keep on keeping on, my friends. Okay, our final lovely amazing person, Ryota Mitsurai. Okay, it's not exactly the name you were expecting there, was it? It's fine. I'll just cut to the analysis now then, shall I? I didn't really care for Ryota. I'm not alone in that at all either. No strong feelings toward him, I'll be honest. I feel like I appreciate analysing his character much more than I do actually having an emotional attachment to him. Anyway, Ryota Mitsurai, as the ultimate animator, finds himself alone a lot. Because of this, we can notice his lack of social skills and anxiety when attending meetings and interacting with Future Foundation. If you're wondering why I've not made a snide remark about him yet, it's because because that'd be friendly fire. He immerses himself completely in animation, and because of the way it saved him from his depressive state and harsh home life, Ryota comes to see animation as an incredibly influential medium. So much so, in fact, that he wants to create it himself to inspire the same feeling in others' hearts that it once did in his own. We can notice this across both arcs, how Ryota devotes himself so intently to the bigger picture, idolizing Makoto's hope, and seeing past the malice others project onto him. He actually wants to hear Makoto out, to understand his position and how he thinks. He's intent on creating the world's hope, but that intent also makes him desperate. Because of that, Tengan understands that Ryota is someone who will crack under pressure, someone who will do anything to spread and inspire hope. That's how the Hope video comes about, a video that quite literally brainwashes people into a twisted version of hope, a despairful imitation of it if you will. We can see how badly Mitsurai wants to be the good guy, how desperately he wants his years of isolation, cooped up alone in his room animating till the cows come home, to be validated through tangible results. When Junko exploited him to create despair, it broke him in a very specific way. He tried so hard to make people happy that when he realised what his devotion had done, how it allowed Junko to slip past his boundaries and get into his head, it only made him more compelled to retroactively fix the problem he created. And if a despair video worked, then a hope video should too, right? To me, Ryota is someone who finds comfort in a powerful medium, but becomes dependent on it. His entire sense of purpose is tied to the one talent that gives his life meaning, and that dependency makes him vulnerable. He's willing to settle for less as long as it's something. The promise of help is enough for him, even if that promise is ultimately hollow. My, oh my, okay, that's quite a hefty section there, isn't it? Anywho, I'd like to move on to chapter 3, analysing the story and plot beats themselves here. We're going to be talking about certain scenes, their narrative impact, why they work, so on and so forth, all the nerdy stuff. So be excited for some real deep shit now. And yes, this chapter was simply the shallow end of a deep, deep pool, my friend. A pool of hope and a pool of despair, but most of all, a pool we can all swim in together. What the fuck was that? I genuinely have no clue. Okay, see you after the break. I mean, it's title sequence. Hello, hi, it's me. Let's just go ahead and hop right on in.
Shut your face! You don't know what you're talking about!
I think there are countless moments in Future Arc where the show makes very deliberate structural choices that have specific effects on the viewer, and naturally, the fun part is figuring out why they work. I won't be covering everything, we'd be here all day, so I'm picking the moments that actually catch my eye. I'd rather analyse Tengan's hairline with passion than half-arse a breakdown of a scene I don't have much to say about, you know? So, what better place to start than with the very first death? Chisa Yukizome is handled in a fascinating way here because her death is directly tied to how this anime is structured. Chisa functions as the bridge between Future Arc and Despair Arc. The moment we see her corpse in Future Arc is the moment she's introduced in Despair Arc. You get it? That timing forges an immediate connection between the two stories. Both arcs begin through Chisa. She believes wholeheartedly in hope, in trust, in the goodness of others, and that belief becomes a thematic through line that links the arcs at their start. They reunify again at the very end in Hope Arc, an episode explicitly about both casts embracing hope together. Structurally, Chisa opens the story and Hope closes it. That connection becomes even more interesting when you look at which Chisa we're actually seeing. In Despair Arc, Chisa is herself, genuinely hopeful and badass as they come. In Future Arc, she's an ultimate despair masquerading as a beacon of hope. The contrast immediately tells us that nothing is as it seems, even if it's not actually revealed yet. Despair Arc is up front, right? We follow the villains directly, understand who they are and what they're doing, maybe a little too much. Future Arc, though, is more reserved. Information is drip-fed. We learn alongside the characters. The arcs mirror one another not through plot, but through philosophy. One shows truth openly, the other hides it behind appearances. What's clever is how Despair Arc retroactively changes how we view Chisa's death. The more important she becomes over there, the more we assume she must matter in Future Arc too. If she's this central to one story, surely she'll be central to the other. And because of that assumption, Chisa's presence echoes throughout an arc where she isn't even alive. She feels important simply because the structure tells us she should be. And then the enormous, mind-blowing reveal lands as a short realization after the credits roll. Her relevance to Future Arc is basically nil. That's the point, it's a deliberate subversion of expectation, and one I actually really like. See, that's a contrarian little thing there. It's similar to how characters like Rantaro or Mami are framed. He appears important, dies early, and turns out to be important. Chisa does the inverse. She appears unimportant, dies early, and is revealed to be important through Despair Arc, and then is ultimately unimportant to Future Arc itself, even though that's where she met her end. And of course, with her marking the beginning of the killing game, it leads our cast to confuse themselves and turn to each other's throats for an answer. For someone to blame. Ultimately, the bickering crystallizes with Juzo kneeing the hapless Ryota in the gut, leading to our first public execution.
I am Byakuya Togami.
Bandai's death exists to teach the audience one thing: results. This is the killing game making its intent clear. Despair isn't ambiguous, it doesn't debate, it doesn't wait. The moment you push against its illusion of rules, it appears and it strikes. Bandai's death is fast, abrupt and brutal. He is living and dying proof that the game has truly begun. What makes it so effective is the contrast it establishes. This is the first execution and it immediately demonstrates the two faces of mutual killing, the silent and unmoving, and the visceral and painful. Once that line is crossed, the stakes lock into place. people can just die, and that's it. They're gone for good. You're trapped in the room with the body. You can't move past it the way you would in battle. You can't escape the aftermath. Bandai's corpse becomes a constant reminder, not just of what happened, but of how quickly it can happen again. And there's something especially cruel in who establishes that there's no exit. Bandai is the one who proves there's nowhere to run. Through the very body you instinctively want to look away from, the game tells you the truth. You're stuck here, and you're just gonna have to live with what you see. It's chilling, and it works incredibly well. Not long after that, the participants split up into groups, not because they're trying to, say, escape efficiently by covering multiple grounds at once. No, it's because they hate each other. And looking back on that decision, it taps into something familiar we see across every killing game. There's always that guy who tries to keep everyone together. In Danganronpa 1, Taka makes daily attendance at the dining hall mandatory. In Danganronpa 2, the ultimate imposter lays that same groundwork, and it continues even after he's gone. Every game introduces someone who genuinely believes that sticking together is the solution. And yet, the game still happens, murders still occur. Kinda makes poor Taka's hard work look silly now, doesn't it? Poor Taka. We love you, Taka. I love you, Taka. Anyway, what's interesting here is that Future Arc does the opposite. Everyone splits up immediately, and despite going completely against the stay together philosophy, the result is the same. Death. No matter how much you want to delude yourself into believing there's a foolproof way to prevent a killing game, there isn't. Sticking together doesn't save you, it just increases tension. Staying apart doesn't save you either, it just breeds isolation and paranoia. The structure is rigged either way, and Future Arc makes that painfully clear by refusing to even pretend that unity would have helped. People hate Future Arc for telling the truth they don't want you to know, you know? Okay, keep going.
Shut your face! You don't know what you're talking.
Oh, hey, look, it's, Hina's fake-out death is such a strange thing to include, but I really like how it deliberately calls back to Danganronpa 1 once again. We see her, someone we're emotionally attached to, apparently dead, and then, instantly, the screen cuts to black and we're thrown straight back into Despair Arc again. The break between seeing the body, then travelling back to the past for like 20 minutes, puts the viewer in the exact emotional position as Makoto when he found Sayaka's corpse. He just dropped to the floor and passed out. The fact that it picks up exactly where we left off in the next episode keeps that continuity intact. It's as if we see her, black out, dream happy thoughts, and boom, we're back. It feels like a fainting spell, like we lost consciousness and woke up unsure whether what we saw was real. It was. Also, unlike us, the fact Makoto doesn't pass out as he did with Sayaka shows us how desensitized he's become. He hyperventilates, he's clearly in shock, but he doesn't scream. Because, quite frankly, he doesn't have it in him anymore. The horror isn't in the sight itself, but the realization that it happened again, that he lost someone close to him again. All that death he's experienced makes him less reactive to the body before him, and more to what it represents from his POV. It recreates a very specific emotional state, one that ties Makoto's first trauma directly to his present one, and shows us just how much he's changed in between, for better or worse. Oh, I almost forgot, right after that we realised who really died that night and did... was Gozu. Damn it, the best character's gone. I guess I'll just hop right in there with the thing I want to talk about, because I'm super proud of myself for this discovery, I can't lie. Now hear me out, both Bandai and Gozu's deaths are mirrors of Danganronpa 1. There's a lot of parallels between this and the first game I've realised. It really does come full circle, huh?
I am a practicing homosexual.
Bandai is Mukuro Ikusaba and Gozu is Sayaka Maezono. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this.
I'm Kaito Momota. luminary of the star.
Daisaku Bandai is the first person executed in Future Arc, and notably, his death isn't treated as a huge narrative moment. There's no sacrifice, no immediate plot relevance at all. It's abrupt, it's public, and most importantly, it is an act of defiance. The rest of the executions come from action. Bandai simply refuses to look away. Who does that remind you of? Mukuro Ikusaba is executed in an act of defiance. Her execution is quick and doesn't provide immediate plot relevance. It's also public, witnessed by everyone, and marks itself as the only execution not carried out after a trial verdict. In other words, it doesn't follow the usual pattern. I mean, come on, pretty obvious, right? They're extremely similar instances. I reckon there's more than enough ground to call this intentional inspiration. Gozu, meanwhile, is the first person to get truly close to Makoto out of all the new faces he meets that day. They share a heartfelt moment, go to sleep, and he's dead the next day. He dies right where Makoto slept, immediately after that moment of connection, which, yeah, duh, is exactly what happened with Sayaka. Sayaka dies in Makoto's room, the place he rests, right after reaching out to him emotionally. Gozu dies in that same symbolic space. Both deaths happen before the game can fully settle in, and both exist to rip Makoto and the viewer straight back into the carnage. Counterpoint, you could also say that Chisa is that person, and I kind of would agree with you there as well, because they do share a heartfelt moment. Then again, Makoto didn't go to sleep. Oh wait, yeah he did. Wait, no, but Gozu was stabbed. Do you know what I mean? Oh no, but she was stabbed as well. Oh, I've just done myself in then. Right, okay, Gozu, oh, I thought I had it then as well. I thought I had a really good point, and instead I'm wrong. Shut up, no I'm not, I'm quitting this out.
Shut your face! You don't know what you're talking about!
Future Arc opens by recreating the emotional language of the first killing game. Daisaku dies in the main room, just like Mukuro in the gym. Gozu dies when Makoto sleeps, just like Sayaka dies in his room, blah de blah. The first deaths are meant to feel so deliciously familiar, I could just take a bite out of it. That's my humorous commentary on that. After Gozu gets the smackdown of his life, literally, Makoto deems it just the right time to monologue. So he makes his way to the monitoring room and starts speaking. Is that analysis I hear? This moment is a direct juxtaposition to the first killing school life. Back then, Makoto's big speeches came late, only after everything had fell apart. Here, he delivers one immediately. Wha-bam! You're not getting me this time. He's learned what worked before, and our boy is determined to apply that formula again. Makoto knows his words once turned despair into hope, so naturally, when the killing game starts again, he assumes that same ability will save everyone now. He does the same when he pops in at the end of Danganronpa 2, it's almost foolproof. Almost. Just chatter on about this and that, and hey, look, it worked. Someone should call Nagito, I think he got the formula wrong. But it's also coming from guilt. He's still haunted by the lives he couldn't save. Somewhere inside, he believes that if he had just spoken up sooner, if he'd been a little braver, a little quicker, maybe they wouldn't have died. That guilt drives him to act early this time. The last thing he wants is to feel responsible for more carnage. Despite the Ultimate Hope title and what he aptly calls his blind optimism, Makoto has skeletons in his closet, insecurities, fears, and the weight of every failure he's carried since the first game. The difference between him and most others, though, is that he learns from it. He tries to evolve. He speaks because silence once cost lives. But as we know, it doesn't work this time. Kyosuke doesn't listen. It just makes him more rigid and more annoying. Makoto's attempt to reason with him, his go-to skill by the way, backfires. It's the first time his unwavering faith and hope is stamped with failure, and like a stamp, that failure is hard to rub off. Poor lad struggles with that thought for the rest of the show, but hey, I guess it shows he cares, right? At the same time that's happening, Seiko is having her outburst.
Shut your face! You don't know.
What's fascinating about how Seiko is framed here is that the show paints her as antagonistic from the start. We see her as an extension of Kyosuke and Juzo, another pursuer of the people we actually care about. The framing makes her look monstrous, which is reinforced when she overdoses and transforms. When Ruruka and Sonosuke appear to be simply looking for safety, Seiko confronts them. Notably, it's Ruruka who speaks first. Subtle bit of foreshadowing there. Had she kept her distance, Seiko might have not even acknowledged her. But Ruruka just has to spit venom. And because Ruruka is our focus character at this point, her words seem more credible. The show wants us to believe Seiko is the threat. Her voice carries that same venom, sharp, feral, defensive, and when she rips off her mask and screams, it registers to us as blind aggression. She's set up as the villain, only for the truth to unfold later. Her super slick, hyper-realistic 4K demon form makes that contrast visual. The exaggerated muscle mass and animalistic energy embody the years of tension and pain she's carried. The monstrous design is her burden, fully realised. Even the details echo that symbolism. Her hair, long and white, immediately stands out. It mirrors Izuru, another character who exists between dualities. Izuru's hair is black, his frame slender and passive, reflecting boredom and detachment. Seiko is the opposite, broad and dynamic, outwardly powerful. Her white hair becomes a deliberate inversion, white like hope, white like catharsis. It's foreshadowing that she's not the true villain here. And if you want to go full visual metaphor nerd, which I do, the hair length itself implies release. Stress is said to make your hair fall out, and Seiko's hair here is long enough to suggest she's finally letting go of the stress and expressing everything she's suppressed. All that pain pours out as she absolutely obliterates Ruruka in her own mind. Moving forward come the flashbacks, and oh my god, they are heartbreaking. We learn how much Seiko trusted Ruruka, how acknowledged she once felt. The editing toys with our perception, forcing us to reevaluate Seiko in real time. But before we fully process that empathy, we're thrown right back into the violence. Now though, the subtext is obvious. Seiko's rage is betrayal incarnate. The fact that she recognises Ruruka's scent mid-frenzy is such a brilliant detail. It's the scent of sweets, the one thing she was guilt-tripped for refusing. That she still remembers it shows how deeply she internalised that guilt. You don't memorise a smell of all things out of hatred. You memorise it because it hurt you, because it defined you in some way. And then comes, in my opinion, the best scene in Future Arc. While stuff is certainly happening, flashbacks intercut the fight, reframing both women at once. Seiko's humanity surfaces while Ruruka's mask finally cracks. Everything we thought we knew is flipped. Seiko isn't evil, and Ruruka isn't kind. We hear both of their inner monologues, Seiko recognizing Ruruka's manipulation, Ruruka rationalizing that manipulation. FNAF. She hides behind fear until she gains the upper hand, and when she does, she flaunts it. The audacity.
Shut your face! You don't—
She could stomp on Seiko's shadow right now and end it, but instead she toys with her. That dominance is Ruruka's drug. It paints Seiko as a monkey bound to dance for her until she says stop. It's the same power dynamic she used in their friendship, keeping control until the very end. In that light, they're perfect inversions of each other. Seiko is not strong, Ruruka is not content. They're dualistic, each wanting what the other represents. Then comes the visual masterstroke. Here we go. Seiko rips the lights from the walls, plunging the room into darkness.
Ooh, I'm fat Yaku, two got me now. There's two Byakuyus now. Two Byakuyus inside me.
From a cinematography standpoint, it's symbolic. Why wouldn't it be? The bright lighting represents Ruruka's control, the darkness, Seiko reclaiming the stage. When Seiko dangles upside down in front of Ruruka behind the glass, that dichotomy is ever clearer. Seiko is at her lowest, desperate and broken. Ruruka stands upright, feeling powerful. Yet as Seiko pounds her fist against the barrier, Ruruka seems to shrink. Blood splatters across the glass. Behind it, Ruruka's face. It evokes bloodlust, making us think she's about to die. But it's actually foreshadowing. The blood isn't hers, but Seiko's. That image speaks to me. Blood on Ruruka's face, but not her own, mirroring how she'll later kill Sonosuke to save herself. What really gives this sequence its punch, though, is the desperation. Both women are trying to justify themselves, narrating the same memories through opposite lenses. On one hand, Ruruka isn't lying necessarily when she said she depended on Seiko. She did. For her, Seiko's friendship was transactional, something to use when convenient. But she says need, when she needed her. Need implies last resort. Seiko was the emergency tool in her life. But the flashbacks make it worse because on the other hand, we see Ruruka's dependence evolve from life-saving moments to petty manipulation. From Seiko curing her dog to supplying chemicals for rigged competitions, her baseline for need only increased across those years, as Seiko did more and more for her for less and less in return. Ruruka only feels betrayed because she lost control. She may have been the one to cut ties with Seiko, but as that decision settled in, classic Ruruka, she had to lie to herself. Instead of admitting she made a mistake, she just doubles down on making Seiko a villain. Seiko, meanwhile, finally lets herself think the thought she's always suppressed, the realization she ignored for the sake of kindness. She admits to herself that Ruruka is a monster. She remembers each instance so clearly, flicking through them in her mind. This thought plagued her for so long. It built itself a case file across each interaction, yet it's only now that Seiko truly recognizes it and embraces that feeling. That catharsis earned through both the flashbacks and her final reflection feels so powerful precisely because we arrived there with her. And when the glass finally shatters, the camera doesn't linger on either of them. It just shows the shards, drifting as both women express the same thought in unison. They both believe they're the victim. For a fleeting moment, they're united by that delusion. It's such a powerful sequence, so scrumptiously layered, and easily one of the best scenes in Danganronpa 3. Seiko's character shines so beautifully bright, Ruruka's too. It never peaks like that again, I'll tell you that. And by the sounds of it, neither will I. That's my best work right there. I might as well go home. See you later. Now, I was going to talk about Kazuo Tengan's death, but honestly, I just couldn't really find much to say about it. Call me lazy, because that's probably the case, but I mostly just see it as the exposition section. One thing I will say, though, is how it humanizes Kyosuke. The moment his care for Chisa is called into question, Kyosuke's eyes widen. From that point on, he gets angrier and angrier. Frustration bleeds through every drawn-out line of Tengan's explanation. It's a rare glimpse of emotion from someone who spent the entire series as a far treating logic as law. Beneath all that calculation, there is a human being who loves someone and cannot stand having that love dissected. It also reinforces how obsessive he's been in the pursuit of truth. He dismisses any form of combat, physical or intellectual, because all he wants are answers. Once he decides that Tengan is part of ultimate despair, his focus narrows completely. Get the information, then eliminate the source. Nothing else matters. It cues us to oh shit ourselves when he finally snaps and delivers the killing blow, as we realize this is only the beginning of his wrath. There's so much more weight behind his resolve once the answer is certain. And also, right, can we talk about the soundtrack? I love it. As he accepts the information, it builds and builds until he grabs his sword and goes in for the strike. But it doesn't crescendo. It just gets a bit louder. That choice frames Tengan's death as a casualty, like most deaths in this series. Even the music doesn't stop for him, it just keeps moving and moving, shows you how fucking boring he is. The focus isn't the man dying on the floor, but the mission continuing without him. Okay, let's get out of here with this sadness. We have a happy moment, which is immediately brought down by sadness. Okay, it's Danganronpa, what can I say? Oh, what's that? That pun was terrible? I guess you could say that, alright. Well, you got me. Moving on. Episode 6 opens with a flashback. The microphone. It's fine, I'll do it again. Episode 6 opens with a flashback. And it's so sweet. For a brief moment, we get to see how things used to be. Coming right after Kyosuke's revelation in the present, that return to simplicity hits harder is something Nagito's dog. It gives us hope. Hope that there's still humanity left in him. That maybe he can pull himself back from this ideology he's built his life around and turn it into something gentler. And then it cuts. The air just snaps. We fade back into the present, Munakata bearing over Chisa's corpse. The silence here is immaculate, bro. This shit lands beautifully. And then, without warning, he drives his sword straight through her body. That single act marks the death of his humanity. Moments ago, we saw what he used to be. Now we get to watch that part of him die. It's the perfect visual summary of this entire Killing Games thesis, that this time, hope will finally break. Even people like the great Kyosuke Munakata, who cling to their own warped versions of hope with iron conviction, can shatter when the one thing anchoring them to humanity is gone. And a cheeky detail I absolutely adore, he leaves the sword there. It's such a simple image, but it speaks more meaning than I could ever write. The sword becomes the weight of his past, the piece of himself he can't carry any further. As much as he wants to hate Chisa, to bury every emotion tied to her, he can't. Leaving his blade lodged in her chest is like leaving behind the part of him that still feels. If that sword represents his will, his judgment and his purpose, then where he leaves it matters. He leaves it with her. With the version of her that still exists in his memory, the one untainted by despair. And in doing so, he symbolically abandons what's left of his heart. Wow, alright, short but sweet. Didn't know I had it in me to write like that. Well, things don't exactly get better from here, since baby Whittle Makoto has a bad dream. Kyoko's dead but not really, and this cheeky little hallucination has far more relevance than it first appears. First off, that's not a word. First off, Makoto waking up with his head on a desk directly mirrors something else. Something else. Take a guess. It's a clever callback that immediately grounds us in his trauma loop. Hope de despair and repita. The wound on Dream Kyoko sits in her chest. We never get a clear angle, but assuming it's on the right side, our right, their left, it's foreshadowing then. Foreshadowing the deduction Kyoko will later make, that every killing in this game happened the same way, with the same wound. This entire dream sequence is built as layered foreshadowing. There is a lot of it. Don't believe me? Don't believe me? Don't believe me? The fucking knife is a part of it. It only partially pierces her skin, unlike Hina's fake-out death 3 episodes ago where the injury was staged. Here, the exposed blade suggests it's real and non-retractable. Makoto's subconscious makes the wound convincing so he won't doubt it. It's his mind's way of forcing him to accept the impossible, that Kyoko might genuinely be gone. And I'm going to improv this bit because I just realised it, but look, it's, because it's halfway through, yeah? It's halfway because she's only halfway dead, because when she dies, she gets revived later because she's not fully poisoned because she takes the antidote. So, the knife being halfway through means that she's not truly dead, she's only halfway dead, because she comes back to life later. And of course, the choice of Kyoko is deliberate. Despite spending most of his time with Hina this whole time, the person he dreads losing most is her. Even apart, she's the one his mind conjures up when visualizing death. Classic Negiri bait. Well played, writers.
Excuse me, Chairman, isn't this harassment?
And then Demosuke Stupicata appears to lecture him within the dream. Demosuke. And that's more Shadow of the Four. Later, after Kyoko's real death, Munakata will indeed be the one to monologue to Makoto. Seeing that dynamic first appear in a nightmare tells us a lot about Makoto's subconscious. He views Munakata as more than an enemy, a threat to his ideology, even the person who could take everything away from him, even hope itself. Makoto's dream casts Munakata as the kind of man who would kill simply for association, for daring to care about Makoto, even a smidge. It forces his mind to ask uncomfortable questions. If Kyosuke's philosophy is right, if hope is that fragile, could he still endure? The dream is his twisted way of answering that question. And because this comes not long after the fake out of Hina's death, the context makes sense. Holy goodness, surprisingly, he's still shaken up a little bit. That moment forced him to confront how quickly despair can override even him. For a split second, he did want to give in, to trade hope for revenge. This is the show's way of saying that Makoto has not let that fury leave him, and we'll certainly see it resurface later on. Cool foreshadowing, both narratively and psychologically. Speaking of psychologically, Episode 7. I was going to talk about it in depth, but I feel like there's not tons to say. It's not exactly filler, but I don't remember anything that happened, and I've watched it at least 5 times in sub and dub for this video, so love Komaru, and Toko, and Monica, and Monokuma. Nice, well done me. You know, I was planning on there being a joke here. There was going to be a joke, but the script just says, insert clip. What do you mean clip? Oh, you mean this one? Because I'll do it. I'll put that clip in right now.
Shut your face! You don't know what you're talking about!
Much more interestingly though, Koichi dies. Man, I can't wait to analyze this. Koichi Kizakura is an interesting case because the show wraps him all up at once, then leaves us to process the fallout after his body's already hit the endless abyss. Up to that point, I always read his framing as antagonistic. He drifts into Kyoko and Ryota's orbit like that one kid at school who just invited himself into conversations back in the day. You know that kid? Providing a running commentary of jokes and dry observations. Yes, that kid was me. Okay, alright. Kyoko, naturally, detective-y senses tingling, notes that she's following him, and of course, she's absolutely fine with that. Kyoko's practically immune to fear, so tagging along with a potential murderer sounds like an afternoon well spent. Episode 8 leans into that ambiguity. It opens with a flashback of Koichi on the front lines, and I'll say it, the military outfit, it works on him, bro, not gonna lie. Then, right after physical education teacher dies, yep, that's her actual name on the wiki as well. He mutters Kyoko's name in a completely unreadable tone. Was it anger? Care? Did he just like the way it rolled off the tongue? Kyoko, whatever it was. It only flash forward, and when big boy pants Juzo Sakakura barges in to threaten Kyoko, as he does, Koichi reacts by throwing a book at him. It misses, on purpose I hope, otherwise that's really embarrassing. Hitting Juzo would have shattered the tension and sent him into a frenzy. Koichi, ever the observer, knows better. He thrives on prediction, and the safest move is the one that buys him time. That throw, pointless as it seems, shifts him from suspicious to morally grey. There's no reason to risk provoking Juzo unless you care, or unless you're hiding something deeper, and Koichi's not exactly built for combat. If he wanted Kyoko dead, there are far easier ways. So when he chooses to bait Juzo instead, it reads as instinctively protective. The way he does it is impressive. Within seconds, Koichi reads Juzo like a book, no pun intended. He pokes at exactly the right insecurity, blending deduction with humor, and suddenly he's in control. That's the look of someone who knows the plan, someone who's learned how to poke the bear without being mauled. In that instant, he becomes dangerous, unpredictable in the best possible way. And then, just as the tension peaks, Stupuruka triggers a trap, because now's the best time apparently. Kyoko falls, Koichi reacts. What makes this moment so powerful is how it completely reverses the setup. Moments ago he was the master observer, now he's blindsided. That contrast humanizes him, his composure cracks, replaced by sheer instinct. When he dives in to save Kyoko, fully aware that doing so would violate his NG code and guarantee his death, his entire arc folds in on itself. We, the audience, instantly understand what that sound means, and so does he. The jingle seals his fate, but he doesn't hesitate. Symbolically, it's perfect. Kyoko falling into an abyss, into darkness, into the unknown, and Koichi leaps after her. Saving her from that void becomes a parental act, something instinctive and selfless. The abyss represents what happens when no one's there to catch you, when you fall alone. Koichi chooses to fall with her, to be consumed in her place. The poison climbing from his wrist, engulfing him as he pulls her up, drives that home beautifully. It spreads from the direction of the abyss upward, as if the darkness itself is swallowing him, and yet, even as he's being consumed, he uses every fibre of his strength to push her toward the light. The visual contrast is interesting here too. His face twisted in pain and desperation, hers blank with confusion. She doesn't understand why this is happening. He does. That gap between understanding and memory is heartbreak incarnate. And then, as he falls, staggered, cross-faded with fleeting memories, we get closure. Even if we don't yet know the full weight of his promise, that's Despair Arc's job, we can feel it mattered. They were friends. When the episode reuses that CG from Danganronpa 1 and reframes it to show Koichi as the one who took the picture, fuck you guys. He was there from the beginning. He didn't just make this happen because he thought she was cool. There is history, care, and love into every strain of muscle he endured to drag her from death. It's such a perfect send-off. A man defined by irony and avoidance dies doing the most sincerest thing imaginable. And it rounds out Koichi beautifully. I love it to bits. Once Kyoko gets out of there, she reunites with Makoto, but not before delivering one of the most beautiful scenes in the entire series. Her words don't need much unpacking, they speak for themselves, but how she uses them and what they represent is what makes this moment so goddamn awesome. She speaks to Ryota. Okay, Mr. Obvious, am I wrong? He's the one questioning Makoto's usefulness, and Kyoko dismantles that idea in the most calm, yet passively aggressive way possible. She reminds him that Makoto has saved her life in ways she could never save herself by offering hope when logic couldn't. The way she frames him as an unassuming, ordinary man with a heart larger than his title spreads that hope to Ryota. By deconstructing the ultimate hope label, she flips its meaning. It's no longer imposing title, pathetic man, but imposing title, genuine man. Makoto was given a name far greater than himself, and yet his hope never became arrogance. His humility is his strength. If someone so ordinary can carry that weight and still stand for hope, then Ryota can too. And don't think I didn't notice that little cough you did when you realized he was behind you, Kyoko, you're not slick. Then comes the scene's tonal shift. For the first time in this depressing building, things actually feel content. The music itself softens, warm and uplifting. It feels a lot different to when stuff just slows down or goes quiet. This feels genuinely positive. It's the first time since this killing began that we're allowed to breathe, thank goodness. And in that quiet, Makoto doubts himself. He blames his ideals for the deaths around him. Seeing Kyoko immediately step in, dropping her composure for once, reminds us how much she's changed. It could have been framed as duty or respect for what he represents, but it isn't, not one bit. She protects his heart solely. And she lets him speak, lets him spiral. She lets him see himself as small. Then, wordlessly, she removes her glove and places her scarred hand over his. It is a monumental choice. In that gesture, the narrative shows how her care for Makoto now outweighs her own shame. Others are in the room, they'll see her scars, but unlike before, this time she doesn't do it to clear her name in a trial of truth and lies. She does it because she wants to. She's carrying forward Koichi's legacy. Koichi reached out for her hand, literally saving her from death, and now she extends that same gesture to Makoto. She's learned that sometimes emotion has to override reason, that vulnerability can still be a form of strength. Building on that, her words become deeply personal. She talks directly to him as a person. She tells him that his words changed her life, that his honesty gave her the courage to open up again. Kyoko herself becomes living proof that Makoto's hope works, that his belief in people can genuinely change them. And to build on that, I can't help but discuss the shot composition. Of course I can't. The small visual decision that makes this scene utterly unforgettable. The camera never shows her hand. It lingers on the empty glove instead. That framing is so good. The glove is Kyoko's symbol, her detective's armor, the iconography of her role. By following the glove instead of the hand, the camera prioritizes the motif over the moment. The story could care less about her monumental character development. All it knows is her duty. That quiet moment of humanity goes unnoticed by the world, as it should be. She's allowed to have that moment privately. We, the audience, only feel the weight of it through implication. It's an intimate exchange meant for her and Makoto alone. And that's what makes it so perfect. And onto a more depressing subject. Juzo notices Kyosuke's wounds, immediately moving to help to patch him up. It's just such a small action, but it's so unmistakably Juzo, and in that moment comes comes the scene that makes me bawl for him. For just a second, Juzo earns the redemption he's been denied his whole little withering life. Emphasis on just a second. He can tell something's off with Kyosuke, of course he can, but he refuses to admit it. Instead, he falls back on duty. He gives a casualty report. This one died, them as well, oh, and him, as though he's reading them from a list rather than watching the entire world crumble. It's his way of retreating into that familiar role, the loyal soldier, the tool, the messenger. If he keeps it professional, maybe he won't have to feel it. But Kyosuke's face speaks 1,000 words. Arctic, completely detached. High as a beast because he is not living on Earth right now. Dude is seeing stars. If those stars were the heads of his victims. When he admits to killing Tengan without a waver in his expression, Juzo cracks for a second. For the first time, fear flickers in the man who's built his entire identity around strength. It's devastating. Kyosuke's fall into obsession forces emotion out of the one person who spent his entire life burying it. Must be fucking terrible if even he's second-guessing himself. It humanizes Juzo in a way that hurts to watch, while simultaneously villainizing Kyosuke's resolve. Juzo tries to rationalize it, to turn it into another mission accomplished moment, pretending it was all part of the plan. He calls Future Foundation Kyosuke's victory, as if making himself small will make the reality easier to accept. That's denial talking, the kind of denial that says he's right, he has to be right, because if he's not, then what the hell am I going to do about it? He fears saying the truth aloud, so he buries it in that same bravado he's used his entire life as armor. Anything to avoid doubting the man he's devoted everything to. Meanwhile, Kyosuke recounts their shared past like scripture. Tengan, Chisa, Juzo himself, turning each death into another stepping stone in his holy war against despair. But notice who he mentions. Tengan, killed by his own hand. Chisa, who took her life. Kyosuke, who left his humanity behind in Chisa's corpse. That leaves only one person still alive, still human. Juzo. The last remnant of emotion left in Kyosuke's world, the next casualty waiting to happen. And then, just as Juzo finally lets himself feel, just as he begins to voice the regret that's been gnawing at him for years, the words he could never say, Kyosuke strikes. The blade goes in, and it's over. The final proof of how far Kyosuke has fallen as Juzo collapses to the floor. He's become the very thing he swore to destroy, killing the one man who still loved him despite everything. And the irony is terrible and somehow funny. In killing despair, he's embraced it completely. The seething hatred in his voice afterward and the anger at despair itself. Goodbye righteousness. Embrace desperation. You can hear the regret between every syllable, the dawning realization of what he's just done. He doesn't see it yet through that single eye he has left, but that moment marks his turning point. The second he looks down at Juzo's body, Kyosuke's crusade becomes hollow. All this violence and all this conviction, it's amounted to nothing but blood and loss. And soon he'll have to face the truth, but not yet. Because morality only gets twisted further beyond this point. Someone else, meanwhile, witnessed, that's not a word. Someone else, meanwhile, witnessed that whole tragedy and tries to console herself by calling it karma. Ruruka sits just down the hall, teary-eyed and petrified. When she whispers, "Everyone gets betrayed in the end," it lands with a double meaning. She's not just talking about the yaoi couple, she's talking about herself. She uses Kyosuke's betrayal to rationalize her own, to convince herself that what she did to Izayoi, the one person who ever truly loved her, was inevitable. And now we finally see it play out. It's a brutal, forlorn scene. Ruruka's trust issues have reached their breaking point. She begs Sonosuke for a clear answer, a solid reassurance that he'll never betray her. And when she doesn't get the clarity she demands, desperation takes over. Sonosuke, you made a huge mistake, buddy, and you don't even know it yet. Deliberately talking of trust while breaking it is such an impactful writing decision. To destroy the very thing you wish to preserve gives the impression that there is nothing despair can't taint. It's all fair game, and anything you love and hold dear can be twisted with just enough fear. Which is why I brought a bop it to run a little experiment. Let's see if despair can bop it, twist it, pull it, and flick it before Ruruka administers the killing blow. Never mind, it's too late. That's the sound of Ruruka's moral code breaking. Up until now, she's never been physical. She's always kept a layer of distance, taunting from afar, affecting people through her sweets, but never taking matters into her own hands. Between her skin and another's, there's always been a barrier, but here, there is not. Sonosuke is usually the one acting, the one seeking physical validation, lying on Ruruka's lap and fighting to protect her, but in this moment, that illusion of physical control is completely flipped. Ruruka turns the tables and fights on her opponent's grounds, yet weaponizes it in the most psychological way possible. She kills Sonosuke, a skilled fighter, through physical action achieved purely by manipulation. Sonosuke's response makes it even more gutting. In his final moments, he tries to reframe it. He convinces himself that she didn't mean it, that she still loves him. And then, in a final act of devotion, he bites back with a kiss of his own, pouring nothing but love into it. Now, not to analyze the kiss, but it creates a twisted sense of revenge. It starts rough, almost panicked. Can't believe I'm talking about a kiss. An understandable reaction of a man facing death, I'd imagine, but it softens as it lingers. The aggression melts into tenderness, reflecting who Sonosuke truly was. Hard on the outside, endlessly gentle within. His last act is to return her poison with love. To die smiling, betrayed and aware of it, but convinced it was worth it. There's nothing more tragic. And yet, part of me can't help but wonder, could Ruruka have not prepared a better option? I mean, she had days. They were actively searching for an exit. Surely, she must have known this confrontation was coming, that eventually Sonosuke would realize he couldn't leave without breaking her NG code. Well, suppose all roads lead back to Ruruka's need for control. This illusion she sells herself keeps her from ever conceding. She doesn't have to be honest. She doesn't have to admit she was lying about wanting to find an exit, so when they do find one, she rules it as time being up, and in fear of betrayal, acts then instead of in advance. But I mean, if she'd just have talked to him, right, told him she was a little scared, that she feared his betrayal, there might have been a way out. They could have agreed to guard each other's NG codes, however that is, so neither of them could betray the other. But she doesn't. She waits until the moment of crisis, lets paranoia dictate her hand, and acts before she can hurt. Don't get me wrong, her choice doesn't make her irredeemably evil. It makes her human, if anything, a scared, desperate girl who never learned how to trust love without fearing the imaginary knife behind it. But because she acts too late, the narrative frames her as the villain. She kills from pain, please believe her, she didn't want to do this. But in the world of Danganronpa, intent does not absolve consequence. See literally every killer in the franchise bar like 2. And unfortunately, that night would be Ruruka Ando's last. Despair comes knocking on a door, and before the night is through, it finds another victim. The next morning brings a sight of horror. Kyoko Kirigiri is dead. Like much of Kyoko's character, her death speaks for itself. It marks the story's absolute low point, the emotional floor beneath which there is nowhere left to fall. The following effect from it reminds us just how integral she is, not just to this narrative, but to Danganronpa as a whole. She's the anchor of this franchise. Attention one and all. Hope doesn't need to be naivete with a touch of reluctant confidence. It can be quiet and intelligent. So when that presence is gone, it leaves an emptiness you can feel. The death of Hope's steering wheel. Without her there to guide it, to direct it towards reason and restraint, Hope becomes something wild and untamed, messy but pure. Kyoko's loss is what forces the survivors to reckon with what hope actually means. All focus is redirected to responsibility, learning how to use hope in a way she would have been proud of. And her bravery makes that all the more heartbreaking. She goes to sleep knowing full well that she might not wake up. Seiko's drug was to her knowledge untested. She was walking willingly into the unknown, all to give the others a chance. It's such an understated, selfless act of courage, and it becomes even more powerful in hindsight. Kyoko has always been the calm at the center of chaos, the one who could look despair in the eye and keep her iron grip around the truth. Her death is what proves just how strong she truly was, and why the others, and we, love her so deeply. It's also exactly why the writers chose to kill her. They knew it'd sting so venomously, and boy were they right on the money. And then, just to twist the knife as if it wasn't already embedded far enough in Ruruka's corpse 2 doors down, the voice that comes over the intercom isn't the hopeful salvation of Makoto, but Kyosuke. Yay. It's poetic in the most awful way. The last time we saw a scene like this, it was reversed. Makoto was the one on the mic, trying to convince Kyosuke to believe in hope after losing Chisa. Now it's Kyosuke's turn to speak, and he uses that same communication line, that same stage, to mock Makoto's ideals. There it is. They're one in the same. Kyosuke lost Chisa, Makoto loses Kyoko, both are forced to face despair. But unlike the ever-reflective Makoto, Kyosuke finds himself weaponizing it. To him, Kyoko's death is a message, proof that all this hope malarkey don't work against true despair. For once, he sees Makoto as his equal, but only so he can tear him down, using the death of someone real, someone who loved and was loved, as propaganda. And Makoto's reaction to all this, the anger, bit of fear, feels so real. Yet even in the face of despair, he grounds himself in Kyoko's words. It reveals that the mindset behind hope is where the problem lies. When hope is tempered by reason, empathy, and fucking just love, it becomes a force of endurance to spring you back on your feet when you're kicked to the curb. Kyosuke's hope was driven by trauma, hence, it is twisted in an immoral way. Because of this scene, it forces us to reframe how we see Kyosuke. I can't sit here and pretend it was his fault anymore because the subtext here reads clear. Manipulation. The influence of Chisa Yukizome, brainwashed into ultimate despair, shaped how he processed loss. Just as Makoto now channels Kyoko's memory into his actions, Kyosuke once did the same with Chisa, but her influence was corrupted. The lesson she left behind was tainted by the woman she was forced to be. He was manipulated. Plain and simple. Now, Kyoko may be gone, but her voice continues to echo in Makoto's heart as he prepares to confront Kyosuke. As he walks, he remembers her. And then we cut to Kyosuke, remembering Chisa. It's a stunning bit of symmetry there. Both men, Hope's chosen heroes, are mourning their guiding lights. When Makoto steps on the shattered glass in the monitoring room, it reminds us of Kyosuke's earlier entrance, smashing through a full wall of glass to confront him. Kyosuke broke loudly, violently. Makoto breaks softly, almost silently. It's the perfect metaphor. Even the gentlest pressure can shatter someone already fractured. That glass is Kyosuke, once intricate, now just fragments of what used to be something beautiful. And it foreshadows what's to come. Makoto will be the one to break the last of him down. The following wide shot frames Makoto bathed in light and Kyosuke cloaked in shadow. I love a little bit of a wide shot, a little bit of framing, don't we? When Kyosuke lunges, his sword cutting through that light, it visualizes his ideology, destroying the beacon of hope he believes attracts despair. He sees Makoto as the light the moth of despair is drawn to, so to speak. Eliminating him becomes a necessity, always has been. At least, he believes that now. As Makoto flees, he leaves a door open behind him. Kyosuke even notes it aloud like, it's obvious where he went, idiot, right? No, nuh-uh. Practically, it's Makoto testing Kyosuke's NG code, his inability to open doors. Symbolically, it's Makoto himself. Even when hunted, even when hated, he still leaves the door open for redemption. Then, the fight begins. The instant Kyosuke's, what is that, a wrist gun? Anyway, it hits Makoto, and the energy fades from his sword. The sound cuts out entirely. Silence. He thinks he has the upper hand, but the framing tells another story. The camera pans across blood on the floor, empty hallways, Makoto staggering onward. From Makoto's perspective, the camera looks ahead toward possibility. From Kyosuke's, it lingers on the blood. He focuses on the trail like a hunter tracking its prey. In the same sense, that frames Makoto as disposable, today's target, today's obstacle in his long journey. It visually recognizes the contrast of how far above Kyosuke believes he is from humanity. When Makoto finally fights back, best he can, with a fire extinguisher, hurling himself into the rubble, it's this pathetic, human moment. For once, Makoto fights on instinct. It's that unrestrained hope I mentioned earlier, hope without its guiding hand. Without Kyoko, his restraint is gone, he doesn't know what to do. Even then, his intent isn't to harm, only to disarm. He throws his body into Kyosuke to stop him, to force him to hear Makoto out. That in itself is proof that Kyoko's spirit still grounds him. Kyosuke, ever the combatant, I mean, did he really think he stood a chance? Soon gains the upper hand, of course he does. The camera tilts, placing him above Makoto, towering, sword raised in the same angle as when he stabbed Chisa's body. Take a look at that deja vu. This moment will decide whether he keeps rejecting the truth or finally faces it. He hesitates, just for a second. That hesitation gives Makoto his opening, his one true weapon. Words. Kyoko once said that was his greatest strength, and here it's proven right. Makoto turns the fight into a conversation, and by doing so, he wins. Kyosuke lays down his sword, more confused than defeated, I'll give him that. The duty in his violence ends, replaced by emotion. He can't bring himself to kill Makoto, I mean he's literally unable to, yet he still lashes out, strangling to silence. He isn't interested in the pain he can inflict. As long as Makoto shuts his mouth, Kyosuke will continue to live in his delusion, an attempt to drown out the voice that's been forcing him to confront the truth. Makoto calls him out directly. He argues that Kyosuke's version of hope has become inseparable from despair, that through his obsession with eradicating it, he's lost sight of what hope even means. If he can't see the world through a hopeful lens, he ignores the signs despair places in his blind spots within the people he loves, the ones he doesn't question because his eyes are constantly focused on the skyline. Though, thankfully, that is his breaking point, truly. Kyosuke finally realizes the truth that Chisa had fallen to despair long ago. He just couldn't bear to see it. Now, forced to confront it through Makoto's words, the world around him collapses, the camera shifts downward, dwarfing him in the frame. He's small now, swallowed by the environment that once looked so orderly. Everything, his mission, his ideals, his strength, his anger, his fear, his love, was a lie he built to survive. And even in that revelation, denial claws at him. When Makoto speaks of Chisa, it sounds almost reverent, as if he values her life more than Kyosuke ever did. He strikes yet again, this time just pummeling into Makoto with fury. He's fighting to protect the illusion of Chisa, the version of her that wasn't tainted. It echoes back to Tengan's words the moment Kyosuke's eyes first widened in disbelief. He's reliving that shock again, only now it hurts more than ever because there's no invitation to continue to fight for her memory. It's the realization that Makoto is inviting him to stop his crusade and just embrace what she was, the monster she was, yet still to see the good in it. And the fact that he switches from using a blade to his fists, it's a much more visceral and human reaction. He doesn't even have time to be dignified, he's just so desperate, it's raw, and it breaks down who we know Kyosuke as. It equalizes him and brings him down to everyone else's level, the level of all the other people who just mercilessly killed in the killing games before him. But Makoto stands firm. He brings up Kyoko, drawing the parallel outright. He admits that if she had fallen to despair, he would still forgive her. That's what hope truly means, to love despite imperfection. A harpoon to the gut, those words piece through. Chisa, how did it happen? His voice breaks on the name. Kyosuke speaks as a man grieving someone he loved. He becomes relatable to us now in such a small, instant way. For once, he looks at Makoto and sees a genuine equal. Not an enemy, not an equal for the sake of dragging him down. It doesn't matter. A man who fears loss just as deeply yet chooses to continue on with love in his heart to honor it. That's all he sees. As Kyosuke screams into the void, the music continues. It keeps playing Makoto's theme, Hope's theme. Even here, after everything, the soundtrack continues because that's who Makoto is. He keeps the music running. He keeps the lights flickering. He keeps hope alive, even for those who've forgotten how to feel it. It empowers him, lets him see the light, and that light lies in it. It being the sacrifice he'll have to make to end despair. Makoto's brainwashing. It's totally understandable that he put himself in the hot seat above anyone else, but this hallucination? Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. The scene opens with a wide shot of a blue-green expanse, like a Van Gogh-style painting. Swirls of colour stretch across what feels like the edge of reality itself. Makoto stands at the precipice, gazing into that oblivion as an astronaut would look down on Earth. From my interpretation, that swirly mess represents the world he's trapped in. The blue is Kyosuke's hope, the green is despair. Notice how there's more blue than green. It frames Kyosuke's ideology as righteous. Since Chisa's manipulation directly shaped his worldview, it makes sense that despair would weaponize what I'll call blue hope to brainwash Makoto into killing himself. It's the same colour symbolism as Ryota's hope video. Blue hope equals manufactured hope. Makoto observing it from afar shows that he's the outsider now, the one looking back at a world that no longer feels like his. And when he realises that Kyosuke might have been right, that eradicating despair leaves only hope, well, needless to say, it's effective. The brainwashing works by removing rational thought, forcing him to internalise the subliminal messaging the same way dreams convince us of heinous absurdity while we're in them. Then Kyoko speaks. She's the first voice he hears, the voice of doubt, of despair. As the most important figure in his life and the most recent he's lost, it makes perfect sense she'd be despair's weapon of choice. Makoto himself is lit in red. He's technically still in the real world, but surrounded by this digital illusion that doesn't fit him. Red light bleeds over his body, the colour of corruption, of sin. He doesn't belong in this perfect blue world, and that mismatch visually frames him as the problem that must be erased. And also, that colour contrast is awfully similar to the World Vanquisher. I'll let you sit with that. That was an improv line, but I just thought I'd mention it. Then Sayaka appears. Her voice interchanges with Kyoko's, the first love and the first loss. Sayaka represents the moment that scarred him into embodying hope. That one mistake, switching rooms and failing to protect her. His hope was born from that death, meaning it was never pure to begin with. It's rooted in guilt. Even his kindness comes from suffering. As the rest of the victims from the killing school life rise around him, the placements are deliberate, almost like a haunting diorama of regret. Leon and Sayaka stand adjacent, murderer and victim forever linked. Mondo and Chihiro are similar. Sakura stands alone, furthest from the others because she chose her own end. Her death was honourable on her own terms. Celeste stands beside Kyoko, a nod to their brief little moment of respect in Trigger Happy Havoc when Celeste entrusted Kyoko with the key to alter ego. Celeste and Hifumi, meanwhile, are far apart, but Celeste and Taka are close. It's a subtle nod to Case 3, Hifumi as the puppet, Taka as the ultimate victim. It separates Hifumi as his human self to him as Celeste's tool. The human that died had no connection to Celeste at all, but she used his body as a cipher for murder, which is why she is adjacent to Taka. She is the real killer. I love it. Each of these placements matters. They're fragments of Makoto's guilt, arranged spatially to represent how he remembers them, as failures of his own creation. As each begins to dissolve, executions, wounds reappearing, it confesses Makoto's perspective to us. We're seeing how he views their deaths as lives he failed to save. He doesn't remember the good times and how they made him happy. He only remembers their deaths, the wounds they lived through and the pain they felt. It emphasizes Makoto's selfless nature. If he views those deaths as fault of his inaction, then it feels right to punish himself because of the pain they went through. Then the blood flows across the screen from left to right. Immediately, we cut to Monokuma's red eye. Awfully convenient. Monokuma is half white, half black, the symbol of duality, but here the blood moves from white to black, hope to despair. It engulfs the left side, the hope side, until nothing remains but red and darkness. Using Monokuma for symbolism. How interesting. Makoto's screams drive that home. Even Hope's ultimate embodiment can break if the circumstances are correct. It's the series reminding us that despair can reach anyone. Nobody is safe because it knows you better than you know yourself. Things ramp up. Makoto submits to despair. He can't help it. The writhing and mindless screaming makes zero impact. There is only one thought left in his mind. Kill. Take me home. And right as Makoto grips the knife, he is slammed back to reality. Juzo Sakakura. Of all people, Juzo saving him? How fucking insane. It shows us how far Makoto has fallen, that even his most vocal hater becomes his accidental savior. And even then, Juzo wasn't trying to save him at all, he was trying to catch the attacker. But even unintentionally, despair forces people together. It twistedly allows enemies to become lovers through their shared love or hatred of despair. What follows is something low-key bone-chilling. As Makoto explains the automated killing system, we see the entire tragedy unfold. Not the big tragedy, this specific one. We see the entire tragedy unfold, the montage of victims, each killed by the system itself. It's this anime's version of the Final Clash trial. You know, when all the Killing Games victims flash on screen? This is it. The realization that there was never an attacker, that it was all automated, crushes Juzo harder than he crushes on Kyosuke, and in that hopeless moment, he admits the truth. He confesses his hatred for Makoto, his shame for what he did, refusing to expose Junko, enabling the despair that followed. That confession shows the full reach of this world's cruelty. It kills, and boy does it hurt, but it also breaks them into self-loathing caricatures of who they once were. Ironically, the Killing Game forces honesty while being built entirely on lies. As the camera pans down, we see the knife that nearly killed Makoto, lying beside Juzo's blood trail. The blade is fractured, the weapon completely non-existent. He's walking away now. It symbolizes him giving up the fight, liberating himself from the shackles of duty. For once, he is acting without orders, without violence, and without fear. He finally makes his own decision to help, to try and get Kyosuke out of there. One last act of clarity before the curtain falls. And with that, Juzo makes his final effort, dragging himself toward the breaker room. He smiles as he reaches it, and for the first time in what feels like forever, that smile is genuine. Anger and fear just dissolve into the ether. Despite everything he's done, everything he regrets, he's happy to help, happy to finally do something that matters. On the other end, Kyosuke realizes what's happening, his eyes widen the same way they did when his love for Chisa was questioned. It's that same kind of pain, the same realization that someone he truly cares for is slipping away, and this time he accepts it. We see it in his movement, first walking, then speeding up, then sprinting. It's symbolic of his emotions. For so long, Kyosuke has been frozen, rigid, and convinced that his feelings were weaknesses. Here, that frost breaks. The more he runs, the more he accepts what he feels. Each step forward is a confession, unspoken but deafening. I care. Then there's the presentation, how the credits start rolling over the scene. This entire sequence is treated like an afterthought, something we weren't meant to see. It's so cool, like Hyoko's hand earlier being left out of frame. This too isn't for the audience. Meanwhile, Juzo fights with everything he has left. Every breath sounds like it could be his last, yet he pushes through. Even after all the pain Kyosuke caused him, he still says it. He wants him to live more than himself. That line alone says so much about who Juzo truly is beneath him. The only him we get to see. He flicks the switch. Boom. Monitors. He flicks another switch. Boom. The NG codes deactivate. Everyone's shackles come off, everyone but him. He's still bound by pain, by blood, by the belief that he's nothing. Those are his shackles. Yet, for one final moment, he rejects that. He allows himself to believe he's done something good. That belief, brief as it is the closest thing to freedom he's ever had. Cut back to Kyosuke. He just lets the arm bangle fall from his wrist. It clatters against the floor, lifeless, just irrelevant. His own life isn't his focus anymore. All he cares about is getting to Juzo. And in such an uncanny way, he moves with this graceful humanity. It's haunting, almost ethereal. The unstoppable force that he once was now looks ghostly, like he's moving through a world that no longer responds to him. The environment fades into the background, only purpose remains. When he reaches that door, it's shot like a body discovery, but without the music. The camera pans from blood to body. And there he is, as Kyosuke kneels beside Juzo's corpse. Always too late. It's the first honest thing he's said in a long, long time. In that silence, it hits us. For all their differences, Juzo and Kyosuke are the same man, both chasing purpose, haunted by guilt, desperate to be useful to someone they loved, and in the end, they both arrive at the truth too late to fix it. Juzo dies believing he finally did something right. Kyosuke lives knowing he didn't. As we close the previous episode on that quiet tragedy, the 12th and final episode of Future Arc begins, where the killing game finally turns its gaze toward revelation. This is the truth episode, the one where everything is laid bare, namely, its single intended target. Call me a plot summarist, but I feel like this goes hard. Ryota realizing that he is the reason this game exists, understandably, doesn't go down well. He crashes to the floor, trembling, making himself small and powerless. He crumbles into the exact reaction this game designed him to have. Its goal, to make the one at its center feel insignificant, is realized as planned. Now, the full weight of both Future and Despair arc behind him, this is Ryota's crescendo, everything we've learned about his isolation, guilt and obsession. He remembers how he acted before and vows not to run again, not to repeat the cowardice that let Junko Enoshima manipulate him. He takes a page out of Makoto's book. He stands, he vows to act. He even acknowledges that Tengan isn't to blame, trying in his own way to understand the remnants of despair just as Makoto strives to. But taking accountability leads him down a darker path. His desperation turns him back to manufactured hope. He convinces himself that his hope video is the only way to save the world. Yet when Makoto doubts him, when he sees through it and calls it what it is, it only makes him feel smaller. If even hope's voice rejects him and despair embraces him, then he has no other choice. Create his own hope. Remind you of a certain dreary-eyed someone? He wants to be like Makoto, but deep down he believes he can't. That belief defines him. It's the voice of someone who's been told time and time again that they're worthless, that the only good they can do is through self-erasure. So he rejects Makoto's words, clings to his own, and hides behind the certainty of his own delusion. When he reveals his NG code, click, Did you hear that? Tid's the puzzle pieces falling into place. Yep, very onomatopoeia-oriented video today, everyone. Tengan engineered this killing game with Ryota's trauma in mind. Ryota, unable to use his talent, was forced to watch a new tragedy unfold, a reflection of the one he created, completely powerless to stop it. Once the game ended and the wristbands fell off, it was inevitable he'd turn back to his video, desperate to erase the pain the fastest way possible. Nobody should be forced to see this, so I will make them see hope, no matter what. As he walks away, teeth gritted, he mutters that he's certain. That word matters. It's him convincing himself, because certainty is the only shield he has left, really. If he doubts even for a moment, it hinders him making a clear decision. And oh my everything and more, he has quite the philosophy. Despair lives in every human heart, so that heart must be altered. It's chillingly logical, a foolproof conclusion born from a broken premise. And in that logic, we empathize with him. Even if his methods horrify us, his intent makes sense, right? Makoto recognizes that. He feels for him, but he also knows empathy is one thing, ignoring accountability is completely different. You can't just walk away from this. Meanwhile, Munakata's fighting his own battle somewhere, slicing through brainwashed Future Foundation members, like actually battering them, look at that. Forced into the main briefing room, the same place this nightmare began, he sees Chisa Yukizome's corpse once again. His sword still driven through her chest. Pull it. Go on, do it. You need this. Take back what you lost. And when he pulls it free, holding both blades at once, it's a declaration, motherfucker! He's found his duality, his balance. One sword for reason, one for love, one for duty, and one for heart. It's the first time in the story Kyosuke truly fights as a complete person. It's everything we wanted for him, and yet it's so badass! Though unfortunately, by the time he reaches that clarity, it's already too late. Ryota's broadcast begins. The Hope video floods the world. And in a horrifying inversion, everything goes still. The planet doesn't erupt into joy or despair, just indifference, completely complacent. Hope without humanity is lifeless, and lifelessness is despair. And Chisa says it best. And so hope was lost. A wish for hope gave birth to despair. Prayers went unanswered, love was betrayed, everything fell into darkness. And so our future ends here. No, because now, hope begins.